Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was raised to be an amoral weapon. In a world where Orochimaru is Hokage and the hidden villages are ruled by tyrants, Tenten finds the lines between ally and enemy blurring when a desperate strategy lands her in the company of enigmatic strangers who wear black cloaks with red clouds. Welcome aboard! Chapter 1, Sacrifice Play. Pain. Tenten's eyes drifted open and her fevered mind grasped for the hope that the last few months of her life had been a bad dream. Those hopes were dashed when the bare stone walls and uncaring steel door of the prison cell she occupied swam into focus. Pain. Tenten's back was on fire. She shifted slightly from where she lay on her stomach on the cold stone floor, and the pain intensified as the movement tugged at the fresh scabs covering the crisscrossing slashes from shoulder to waist left by the kiss of a whip. That pain had become an old friend. A thick tracery of lash marks bore testament to repeated beatings, new cuts crossing over healing scars. Between her legs Tenten ached fiercely, her mind skittered away from those memories. Madness lay that way, and she was clinging to sanity by a thread. Pain. Tenten lay still, taking shallow breaths and trying not to move. Moving hurt too much. Moving reminded her of the fresh wounds, the recent scars, the bone-deep bruises and cracked ribs. Her mouth was as dry as the desert that surrounded Sunagakure, and hunger gnawed at her gut like a feral animal trying to escape. Food and water had stopped arriving through the slit beneath the cell door 2 days ago. When she'd realized that nothing was coming and she didn't hear any footsteps outside, she'd fought the pain long enough to crawl to the door and pound on it with the hand that had the fewest broken fingers. She had yelled with a voice gone hoarse from screaming, to no avail. No one had responded. No one was coming. Pain. Tenten's eyes closed. She lacked the energy to keep them open but hurt too much to sleep. Almost immediately images filled the darkness behind her eyelids. The hallucinations had started the night before, and they were only becoming more vivid. Now when Tenten closed her eyes, and sometimes even when they were open, the lines between the past and the present blurred. Tenten was 4 years old, standing outside her father's forge, watching with wide eyes as her papa taught her older brothers his trade. She was 8 years old, attending the Shinobi Academy. Not a clan heir or a daughter of privilege, just a girl with enough chakra to enroll and a dream of being more than a housewife. Tenten was 12, fighting tears as Hyuga Niji and Rock Lee outclassed her, and her sensei Madogai questioned her dedication to being a kunoichi. She was 14, accepting her chunin vest from the Hokage, and the congratulations of a sensei who no longer doubted her resolve. She was 17, bruised but unbowed, standing on her feet at the end of the Jounin exams, victorious. Then Tenten would blink, and once again she was 18 and slowly dying of dehydration, alone and in pain and trapped in a cell of stone and steel that would soon be her grave. Pain. The cell's steel door swung open. Tenten just stared, truly unafraid. What more could they do to her? A tall man with long, dark hair and a full-face mask stepped into the cell. Her mind fuzzy, Tenten wondered who this was. None of her captors that she'd seen wore a full-face mask. Tenten. The masked man sounded surprised and relieved. That wasn't right. The terrorists who had captured and tortured her for information, the Akatsuki, they called themselves, knew her name, but none cared enough to speak it. The masked man leaned closer. She glanced at the tool pouch on his belt, full of kunai and shuriken. Was he there to give her a quick death, at least? One small mercy from the merciless? Tenten, thank Kami you're alive. The man tugged his mask off, his waist-length hair cascading over her as he did so, and when he drew the mask away, he revealed happy, concerned pale eyes. They had no pupils, but she knew that they saw everything. Niji? Tenten's voice was a raspy croak. Seeing his face at the end was the cruelest hallucination yet. Niji's arms wrapped around her and he drew her close, careless of the dirt, blood and filth on her skin staining his uniform. Ah, she groaned in pain as the movement tore a few of the scabs on her back open, triggering fresh bleeding. Sensing her pain, Niji drew back and she watched rage and horror flicker across his features as his Byakugan took in her wounds. Tenten closed her eyes, unable to look him in the face. Shame filled her as she realized his eyes would see everything her captors had done to her. You're safe now, Tenten, Niji assured her. It's going to be all right. I swear it. He donned his mask once more while yelling over his shoulder for a medic. More ninja with leaf Hittite entered the room. A woman with graying hair wearing the red-on-white shoulder badge of a medical ninja crouched beside Tenten and began to tend to her while Niji hovered nearby. Liar, Tenten thought sadly, how can it ever be all right again? A needle plunged into her arm, and warm darkness swallowed her. 4 months earlier. Begin, Tenten said calmly. The 3 genin surrounding her as she stood in the center of the indoor training area did just that. First, Tenten came under assault from a blur of green and red as Isamu Ken made his presence known. His head came up to her chest now, and sometimes she thought she would see the 13-year-old growing if she watched him long enough. Ken was a taijutsu specialist who had inherited his work ethic from his academy mentor Rock Lee, which Tenten considered a plus. If only he hadn't inherited Lee's fashion sense, too, Tenten lamented silently. Ken's attachment to green jumpsuits and orange leg warmers was especially tragic because of the way they clashed with his buzzcut red hair. His gray eyes were earnest and determined as he tried his best to strike her. She dodged his vigorous assault, blocking punches, batting away kicks and raising an eyebrow in appreciation of some of the more elaborate combo moves he'd picked up recently. It was Ken's eyes flickering to the side for a moment toward a faint buzzing sound that alerted Tenten to another of her genin entering the fray. When the light from above dimmed and the droning got louder, she decided it was time to go on the offensive. Tenten performed the substitution jutsu just as a cloud of Kikai bugs engulfed the wooden training dummy she'd traded places with. Still 12, but just weeks away from her 13th birthday, Aburame Keed was the youngest of Tenten's 3 genin. Like most members of her clan, she wore a hooded overcoat that covered her from head to knee. Underneath it she had short, curly brown hair and a coltish frame. Keed was perceptive, and her reflective silvery eyes, hidden behind her clan's trademark dark glasses, processed information on the battlefield with astonishing quickness. As soon as she saw the dummy, she knew her sensei was directly behind her, and the Kikai bugs reversed course in a roiling swarm. Keed's reflexes weren't yet as fast as her mind, however, so Tenten's kick hit her in the back in spite of her attempt to dodge, dropping the young Aburame onto the mat's face first. As soon as the kick was delivered, Tenten was back on the defensive, ducking under a trio of shuriken that shot through the cloud of Kikai bugs. The clever maneuver prevented her from seeing the whirling weapons until they were very close. Tenten was forced to use the blunted training kunai in her hand to deflect the second volley of projectiles before retaliating with some shuriken of her own. Sporting the intense, brooding expression that her clan seemed to hand out on graduation from the academy, Uchiha Amaya slipped to the side to avoid her sensei's throw before sprinting into melee range, a blur of blue and tan to match the green and red headed for Tenten from the other side. Amaya was 13, a few months older than Ken. Her shoulder-length raven hair was tied back in a ponytail save for slender bangs that framed her face. Like most young Uchiha, she wore a blue tunic with the clan's red and white fan on the back, tan shorts, and reinforced sandals. Her dark eyes were intent as she joined Ken in a coordinated assault. Tenten was pleased to see that the pair had come a long way in their taijutsu coordination since being assigned to her. Ken used the strong fist style created by Madogai, while Amaya fought with the more surgical Uchiha style that focused on pinpoint strikes at joints, tendons, and pressure points. After a year together, they functioned well as a team against both single and multiple opponents, and when they both came at her, Tenten was pleased that she had to put some effort into fending them off. Tenten let the pair wear away at her defenses until Keed's Kikai bugs advanced on her again. When the insects drew close, she threw her kunai at Amaya. That forced the Uchiha girl to dodge and retreat for a moment, giving Tenten an opening to drop a smoke bomb. The opaque cloud engulfed all 3 of them, and in the moment when Ken was disoriented by the loss of his vision, Tenten caught a handful of his tunic and tripped him, sending him tumbling right into Amaya's path as she returned to the fray. They collided and fell to the floor in a heap. That left 2 down for a moment, but while Keed wasn't sending her bugs into the smoke, Tenten could sense from the cloud of tiny chakra signatures in the room that the Aburame girl had manipulated her swarm to surround the obscured area and the objects in the room she could substitute with. That's my clever girl, Tenten thought before she dropped a few slips of paper on the ground, formed a hand sign and silently hinged to change her appearance. When Tenten burst out of the smoke looking like Amaya, the Kikai bugs hesitated. That second of extra time was all she needed to close with Keed, who had left herself unguarded in order to cover Tenten's escape routes from inside the cloud. By the time the smoke dispersed enough to reveal the real Amaya and Ken climbing to their feet, it was too late for Keed. The Aburame girl's taijutsu wasn't her strong point, and in 3 moves Tenten had keyed on the floor in an arm lock, back pinned under her knee. When the Kakai bugs moved closer, Tenten shook her head, drawing another blunted kunai and tapping it warningly against her student's cheek. Not a good idea, she suggested mildly. The bugs halted their advance. It's going to be hard to defend against us while you're pinning keyed, sensei, Amaya suggested as she and Ken prepared to rush Tenten. Well, I do have a hostage to threaten, Tenten pointed out mildly, resting the dull edge of her rubber-coated weapon against Keed's throat. But in any case, I've already neutralized both of you. Look down. Amaya and Ken looked, and groaned in dismay when they saw 2 rectangular pieces of white paper with red borders at their feet, a fairly artistic drawing of an explosion on each. They were fake explosive tags Tenten used in training, and both genin were within their theoretical blast radius. Tenten let go of Keed and the Aburame girl climbed to her feet while her Kakai bugs returned to her, swarming under her coat to return to their hive inside her body. So, let's review, Tenten said briskly. Keed? Rubbing her neck and swallowing hard, Keed looked at Tenten thoughtfully. I overextended my swarm at the end in my attempt to cut off your avenues of escape. Also, I should not have been so close to the training dummies at the start of the fight, she concluded. Correct, Tenten said with a smile. Maintaining range is important, but so is being aware of potential hazards around you, and always having a holdout if your enemy does something unexpected. On the other hand, your deployment of your Kakai bugs was excellent, and you learned from your first mistake. You didn't let me get away with a second substitution. Tenten glanced at her next student. Ken hung his head. The fires of my youth were not strong enough to reach you, sensei, he lamented. As agreed before the match, I will do 500 push-ups, and then I will do dash. Tenten scowled and rapped Ken on his fuzzy head with her knuckles. Ken, the point of organizing genin into squads is to overcome lack of individual experience with numbers and teamwork. I've been a shinobi for a lot longer than you have, you're not going to beat me one-on-one just yet. Where did your teamwork fail? Ken mulled that over for a moment. When you drove Amaya back, before the smoke bomb, I should have retreated as well. Exactly, she said encouragingly. When you 3 find yourselves facing a stronger opponent, fighting as a unit is the only thing that will keep you alive. That means moving in sync with Amaya. Don't let an enemy separate you from her. When that happens, you lose the advantage of numbers. Fighting together you can threaten or at least occupy someone at my level, and that's a good thing. Tenten looked at Amaya. You get points for the shuriken through the Kakai cloud. That attack had speed, accuracy, and an ideal distraction. Amaya smiled at the praise. So tell me how Keed ended up as my hostage. The Uchiha girl blinked. We were tripped up, and your taijutsu is better than hers? Amaya said, looking at Keed apologetically. Why were you tripped up? Tenten asked. Because of the smoke bomb? Amaya guessed. Tenten shook her head. Because when I forced you to move away, you came back at me straight along the same line. I knew where you would be and dropped Ken in your path. Predictable movements will get you killed, Amaya. Amaya frowned. I knew Ken would keep pressing you, I had to get back into the fight quickly. No, your responsibility is to get back into the fight intelligently, not quickly. Your teammate's decision to press forward or fall back in the heat of battle is out of your control, but placing yourself where an enemy suspect you'll be in a low visibility situation doesn't help anyone. Amaya winced, but nodded. I understand, sensei. Tenten grinned and swept her genin up in a group hug, ignoring their grumbling. As long as they were her genin, they would receive hugs, complaints notwithstanding. Good. We're done for the day, you 3 should go get some dinner. Yes, sensei, they replied before heading out. Tenten collected the discarded training weapons and put the dummy back where it belonged before leaving the indoor training area set aside for visitors and stepping out into the cold, dry night air of Sunagakure. After dozens of D-rank missions and months of training, her genin squad had been assigned their first C-rank mission. They'd been in Sunagakure for a month already and would remain for 2 more, serving as the security detail to Kanahagakure's embassy. When most shinobi thought about Sunagakure, they pictured it during the day, a city baked by the brutal desert sun and consumed with searing heat. They saw the white buildings sunk into the ground to stay cool, and the hardy people who made their homes in the unforgiving desert of the land of wind. What didn't come to mind was how cold the city became at night. With no moisture in the air to hold the day's heat, Sunagakir's temperature dropped below freezing just an hour after sundown. In the modest but private apartment afforded to her as a visiting, Jonin Tenten sat at a simple desk with a heavy blanket wrapped around her, writing in her journal by the light of a single lantern. Her room had a fireplace, but the cost of fuel was dear in the desert, so she rarely lit it unless she had an evening guest and dealt with the cold on other nights. Kami Numato Guy had dragged her to colder places to train when she was a genin. Tenten smiled wistfully at the memory of Teen Guy. She was 18 now, a newly minted jonin with a genin team of her own, but she remembered those times so clearly. Most days had been a fight for survival, against her energetic teammates if not an enemy, but the sense of belonging to a unit with a mission and a purpose had been reassuring. Now she was the leader, and she had to provide purpose and what safety she could to her students. Everything came around full circle. Rock Lee was a chunin and a taijutsu instructor at Kanahagakure's Shinobi Academy now, instilling the fires of youth in a new generation. Hyuga Niji had beaten Tenten to chunin by a year and jonin by 2, and was now an ANBU. Tenten had never considered herself to be in competition with the Hyuga genius, however. They had become friends and eventually lovers, and they sought each other out whenever their paths crossed. Shivering despite her blanket, Tenten felt a moment of envy for Amaya, Keed, and Ken. They were quartered in the village's barracks with the Sangenin and had little privacy, but the village at least piped heat into their quarters. The embassy's staff was on its own. Unlike the ambassador, an Uchiha of middling talent and strong political connections, Tenten worked for a living and wasn't rich enough to waste money on firewood every night. Shrugging off the thought, Tenten snugged the blanket tighter around her shoulders, reminded herself that shinobi were strengthened by adversity, and resumed writing. Years ago, shortly after I was promoted to chunin, Guy-sensei said something strange to me. He said, knowledge of the past is a dangerous weapon in these times. He didn't say that to Niji or Lee, just me. At the time, I didn't know what to make of it. It was so out of character for him that I dismissed his words. It took me years to understand what he meant. Knowing too much about the past is dangerous, but useful at times. If the Hokage, may he burn in a hell more horrid than I have the wisdom to devise, suspected how much of Kanahagakure's past I know, he would kill me. He spent decades weaving lies and fictions around what really happened during the Third Shinobi War. That war is when everything went wrong in the elemental nations. I don't know if Orochimaru actually had a hand in the deaths of his sensei Sarutobi Hiruzen and former teammate Jiraiya. He's certainly the one who benefited most from their passing during the war. The Kanahagakure Council named him the Yondaime Hokage before Hiruzen's body was cold. It should have been Namake's Minato, but Orochimaru had more allies on the council. Minato's death fending off the Kyuubi a few years later made it a moot point. It's ironic that the Third Shinobi War, which started as a power struggle between the great hidden villages, ended with the utter destruction of every village but the 5 largest. Once Orochimaru became Hokage, he put forward a radically simple notion: instead of fighting strong adversaries for bits of power and territory, why not simply expand the influence of the Big Five by wiping out all the lesser villages? None of the other Kage trusted him, of course, but when he obliterated Kyuzugakure in a night, minds changed from mist to rock. They asked themselves if they could afford not to do what Orochimaru had, especially when their spies told them about captured Kekii Genkai from grass. Whispers spread of women and children taken captive in the fall of Kyuzugakure, their bloodlines twisted into service of the leaf. In the end, the 5 great villages all did it. Waterfall, Star, Rain, Moon, Stone, Haze, Frost and more were all wiped out. Their shinobi were slaughtered, their unique jutsu and Kekii Genkai stolen to serve the larger villages. Of course, I have no proof that Orochimaru was behind the death of the Sandaime Hokage. Even if I did, would it make a difference? Sand, rock, cloud and mist all like the new status quo. Orochimaru doesn't have any enemies internal to Kanahagakure strong enough to challenge him. Sometimes I wonder if the knowledge of the past I've carefully accumulated is worth the risk. But if no one remembers, then the truth will be lost forever. Sighing, Tenten put away her pen and closed the journal, pressing her palm to the seal on the cover and drawing out the minute trace of her own chakra housed in the seal. In the course of becoming a weapons mistress, Tenten had by necessity learned quite a bit of Fuinjutsu. She'd kept the full breadth of her knowledge a secret, and as far as anyone from Kanahagakure was concerned, she possessed only the skill to store a wide array of weapons in the large scroll she carried into combat on her back. No one living knew that she had the skill to place a seal on her journals that replaced her true writings with fake pages unless her chakra infused the bindings. Anyone opening her journal now would only find the somewhat vapid musings of an earnest, hard-working but not terribly bright kunoichi. Heading for bed and stifling a yawn, Tenten saw a flash of light as she passed the window, followed a moment later by a resounding boom from above. Tenten dropped her blanket and grabbed her large scroll as she peered out the window. "That was a big explosion," she murmured. Several more blasts lit up the sky, and shouts from the neighborhood around her filled the air. Squinting, Tenten was startled to see the light of stars blocked in the sky above. For a moment, a silhouette of a human figure surrounded by a cloud of sand drifted across the moon. "The Kazekage is fighting someone," Tenten realized with a shiver of fear. So far she hadn't had to meet with Sabaka no Gara, the monster of the bloody sand. That was one duty she didn't envy the Uchiha ambassador. Tenten's head turned to the east gate of Sunagakure as more explosions tore the gatehouse apart. Those were explosive tags, not whatever's going on in the sky. "The village is under attack." Tenten's job wasn't to defend their ally, but to protect the embassy. The security job was supposed to be an easy C-ranked mission where her genin students could gain some experience in an allied village while Tenten stayed in the background. Unfortunately, the embassy was just a few blocks from the east gate, which meant the ambassador and his staff were in real danger and she had a job to do. Pausing for only a moment to tie a bright blue armband with a silver plaque on her arm that proclaimed her an authorized foreign ninja, Tenten jumped out the window and took to the shinobi highway of the rooftops. She had to dodge a few twitchy sand ninja, but they saw the armband and her Kanahagakure Hitayate, figured out she was just doing her job, and went on to go do theirs. Tenten was a few blocks away from the embassy when another explosion filled the sky, directly above her. Instinctively she dived into an alleyway between buildings, glancing over her shoulder to see falling sand and debris. She rolled into the shelter of a recessed doorway as falling objects pelted the rooftops and alley. Tenten waited for a few moments before poking her head out, just in time to see one last object plummet from the sky, cratering in the sand at her feet and spraying her with grains that she threw her arm up to deflect. When she looked down a moment later, she froze. Lying in the crater was the red-haired Kazekage. His robes were in tatters and his sand armor was blasted away, his skin red and burned. Gaara's black-ringed teal eyes glared murder at Tenten for a moment before he passed out. "Oh hell!" Tenten muttered. Theoretically, a good leaf shinobi would provide aid to the leader of an allied village. In fact, failing to do so would probably end in an execution if it became known. But Tenten knew just how bloody Gaara's hands were, and she had no desire to die trying to fight whoever had defeated Sunagakure's Jinchuriki and strongest warrior. She could sense two powerful chakra signatures approaching, one from above and the other from the east gate. Tenten was about to leap out of the alleyway and pretend she hadn't seen any of it when three small figures appeared in the alley mouth and ran towards her. Amaya, Keed and Ken emerged from the darkness, skidding to a stop and gaping at the prone form of the Kazekage. Tenten's heart froze with dread as her genin team ran into the alley and their likely deaths, heedless of the powerful adversaries approaching. She furiously considered her options. Run? No, her genin would obey her, but they had already seen Gaara. They wouldn't be able to keep the secret if questioned, and they'd likely be killed with her if the Sand Shinobi or the Hokage found out. Fight? Even with the three of them, bright and promising as they were, Tenten knew she couldn't beat whoever had taken down Gaara. Subterfuge? A plan formed in Tenten's mind, one that would likely mean her death, but life for her students. Pick him up. Hurry! Tenten called to her students, yanking open the recessed doors of the building's cellar. Her genin obeyed, Ken lifting Gaara with impressive strength as the girls grabbed the Kazekage's legs and carried him to Tenten. Under the cover of moving the Kazekage, Tenten palmed a piece of paper with a single-use seal on it and pressed it against Gaara's skin. Tenten knew from experience that exposing oneself to a Jinchuriki's demon-tainted chakra was hazardous, but in this case it was necessary. She grit her teeth and bore it as abrasive chakra that felt like sand under her skin leached into her body. When Tenten drew her hand back, the paper of the seal crumbled to dust and her chakra coils were burning with Gaara's polluted energy. Sensei. Amaya murmured. Your job now is to guard the Kazekage, Tenten instructed her genin, pointing down into the dark cellar. Take him inside and keep quiet until reinforcements arrive. Sensei, we'll fight with you and rescue the Kazekage together. Ken cried with his usual bravado, making a pose. A future Hokage doesn't run from a fight. Tenten had given up reacting openly to Ken's outlandish words and actions, and her Hitaite hid the tick in her brow at his pronouncement. Upon meeting her genin team, Tenten had wondered briefly what sin she had been committed in a past life to deserve one of Kana Hagakure's green beasts, not just as a teacher and a teammate but a student as well. Amaya, also experienced with her brash teammate, calmly smacked him upside the head before dragging him down the stairs by one ear. Keed said nothing, her analytical Aburame mind reaching the same conclusion Amaya had. You're going to draw away whoever did this, she observed as she grabbed Gaara under the shoulders and dragged him down into the basement after Amaya and a protesting Ken. Tenten smiled sadly. Those are my smart girls. Stay quiet. Stay hidden. Both of them, the Aburame and the Uchiha, caught her eyes as she closed the door to the cellar. She could the knowledge in their eyes that they probably wouldn't see her again. It was the way of the shinobi. Drawing a deep breath, Tenten formed a quick hand sign. Henge. A puff of smoke surrounded her, and when it dispelled, she was wearing the appearance of Gaara, monster of the bloody sand. More importantly, she was radiating his foul chakra. It was done not a moment too soon. End of the line, Jinchuriki, un. Glancing up, Tenten saw a slender blond man with a ponytail and long bangs wearing a black cloak with red clouds. He was mounted on the back of a giant white bird that landed and blocked one end of the alley. Surrender, Gaara, a harsh, grating voice demanded from the other end of the alley. A broad, hunched-over form draped in the same black cloak and wearing a broad straw hat blocked that path. You can't escape us. Silently, Tenten was forced to agree with that statement. She recognized Deidara from the bingo book, but the other was a mystery. Both of them were S-class missing nin, just judging by their chakra levels, radiating power and killing intent like nothing she'd ever felt save in the Hokage's presence. But for the sake of her students, she had to try and outmaneuver them. Tenten would have exchanged verbal barbs with them to try to get more information or buy some time. But Gaara rarely spoke to his enemies, and her students' lives depended on her imitating Gaara. Judging Deidara to be a known quantity and the more overconfident of the pair, she charged him silently. Smirking, he drew back his arm and threw something down the alley at her. Tenten formed a hand sign. Bunshin. Another cloud of smoke, and there were 3 Gaaras, one sprinting down the alley and one now running on either wall. You must really be wasted to resort to such a novice trick, Jinchuriki, Deidara sneered. His first projectile, a small clay bird, continued to its original target, the central Gaara, while he opened his other hand and hurled another bird at the left Gaara. You can't hide your chakra from me, un. Katsu. A pair of explosions tore through the alley as the birds hit their marks and detonated. Smirking, Deidara strode to where the left Gaara had fallen, only to stare in disbelief at empty space before glancing over his shoulder at the rapidly fleeing form of the red-headed Kazekage. Feeling slightly exhausted, Tenten nonetheless allowed herself a satisfied grin as she ran. Maybe I'll live through this yet, she thought as she ran for Sunagekire's Jounin barracks, hoping to find enough reinforcements to get the missing nin off her tail. She heard the pair give chase, Deidara cursing and his partner chewing him out for letting her pass. It was one of Tenten's better tricks, and one that worked better on experienced shinobi used to relying on their chakra sense as well as their eyes. She formed 2 bunshin, one with the regular amount of chakra, the other with as much chakra as it would hold without breaking. If she suppressed her own chakra to match that of the regular bunshin in the moment of separation, her opponent would almost always target the wrong one. It wouldn't work on a Hyuga, but just about anyone else was fair game. Overcharging a bunshin like that was draining, but since she was still alive, Tenten wasn't complaining. Leaping from one rooftop to the next, the clattering of wood was her only warning as something shot up from the street below her. Twisting in midair, Tenten hissed as a humanoid figure shot past her, a blade in its hand grazing her leg and drawing blood. When she landed on the rooftop, 2 more twisted figures lunged at her. She dodged and hit them both with a kunai in the center of mass, but it didn't even seem to slow them down. Puppets! Tenten realized in shock as the three were joined by two more, cutting her off from the Jounin barracks. Not good, Tenten muttered, leaping away and fleeing in a different direction. A few puppets she could handle, but they were more resistant to her weapons than living opponents, and they always had nasty surprises built in. They were clumsy and slow compared to Tenten, but more kept showing up, and she realized they were herding her away from the populous areas of Sunagakure towards the outskirts of town. Tenten chafed at the restraints of her disguise. Even with some of Gaara's disgusting chakra in her, she couldn't use sand attacks against the missing Nin, and while she could blow away the puppets with a twin rising dragon, that technique would be a dead giveaway that she wasn't Gaara. Knowing that she wasn't far enough away from her student's hiding place yet, Tenten was forced to flee out beyond Sunagakure's limits and onto the dunes. In the open desert there was nowhere to hide or take cover, making it harder to dodge Deidara's bombs and the small army of puppets. When her legs started feeling cold and numb, Tenten realized she was in even more trouble. There was poison on that first puppet's weapon. Less than a minute later her leg collapsed under her and she fell to the sand. Before she could recover, a pair of puppets tackled her, tangling her limbs in theirs and pinning her. Struggling against them, Tenten saw Deidara's birdland, his strange bulky partner, at his side. The puppet master's robe shifted and a segmented tail ending in a spike shot forward, stopping inches from her throat. "You lose, Jinchuriki," he grated. "Let the poison do its work." Tenten could feel the cold numbness spreading through her body. Soon, she couldn't even struggle against the puppets, and they retreated as Deidara and the puppeteer loomed over her. Lying on the sand, paralyzed, she could see the lights of Sunagakure, bright in the night. "My girls will be safe at least. I hope they get another Jounin sensei who treats them well. Maybe Guy will take them." As darkness ate at her vision, Tenten managed a weak grin. "Sorry, guys. Better luck next time." She released the burning, polluted chakra she'd stolen from Gaara, letting it leave her body all at once. The expulsion of alien chakra disrupted her henge, and with a puff of smoke she returned to being a kunoichi with a leaf hitaiate. As last sights go, that's not bad, Tenten decided with satisfaction, taking in the stunned look of dismay on Deidara's handsome face before the blackness claimed her. "Fuck!" Deidara yelled, glaring at the leaf ninja lying in the sand, a satisfied smile still on her lips after she passed out. Resisting the oh-so-tempting urge to vent his anger on the frustrating kunoichi, he clenched his fists. "We have to go back, undammit, who knows where the Kazekage is now?" Sasori shook his head, crouching over the bun-headed kunoichi. "No, we've lost this round. Sunagakure's on full alert, the Kazekage will be hidden by now, and in any case, look there." Sasori pointed with his tail at movement in the distance. Squinting, Deidara hopped on his bird to get a bit of altitude. What he saw was a knot of shinobi crossing the desert headed for Sunagakure. A number of Kanahagakure's banners were flying over the group, including one with golden thread in its trim. Deidara's eyes narrowed in hate. "The Hokage," he spat. Sasori nodded. "That wasn't in our intel. If Orochimaru's here, he brought his pet Jinchuriki with him. We'd need the leader to face those two and the Kazekage at once. For now we retreat." Deidara blinked in surprise when Sasori drew a green sunbon from his robes and jabbed it into Tenten's neck. Those sunbon held the antidotes to his poisons. "Why'd you do that, We'd have the Kazekage if not for her." Sasori shrugged, wrapping Tenten in his tail and lifting her up. "Getting spies into Kanahagakure is difficult, and this one's a Jounin at least. If we can get information out of her, this night won't have been a complete waste." Grumbling, Deidara nonetheless formed a second large clay bird for Sasori and his prisoner, and they took to the night skies. Chapter 2, Demons of Sand and Leaf. The leaf Anbu known as Sparrow for the bird's face carved on his white mask crouched on the peak of a massive sand dune in the deserts outside Sunagakure, while the Hokage's traveling party moved past below. The other members of his Anbu team, the Hokage's personal guard, were scattered around the perimeter of the group as they ran across the nighttime desert. The other Anbu were constantly in motion, heads turning this way and that, but Sparrow moved differently, no less fluid when running across the sand, but his masked gaze rarely shifted. He had no need, with the Byakugan he could see everything around him without moving his neck. The group had made good time in their journey through the forest and across the desert. It was a slower pace than a lone ninja team would have kept, but even though the Hokage had to travel with a certain amount of followers and hangers-on, they still moved quite rapidly by civilian standards. Orochimaru didn't care for slow travel, and his attendants were all capable of running throughout the day, if not necessarily as fast as a jounin. It worked out well for security purposes, since the Hokage's guards could scout ahead and let their leader set the pace. Anyone he felt was moving too slowly usually didn't last long enough to slow anyone down on the return trip. A bird call from a nearby dune alerted Sparrow to one of his teammates, Lynx, a tall, slender man with short black hair that stood up in spikes. Lynx made several hand gestures in the ANBU sign language, pointing southwest towards Sunagakure. ANBU masks were treated with chakra to prevent even the Byakugan from seeing the face underneath, but Sparrow knew that a pair of 3 Tomo Sharingan lurked behind Lynx's mask, the only eyes in the group capable of seeing what he had signaled. Sparrow frowned. Smoke coming from Sunagakure? We're too far out to be able to see anything short of smoke from a massive blaze, and Sunagakure is built with stone. Sparrow had been focusing his 360-degree vision in a sphere around the Hokage's party, but now he turned his gaze in a single direction, piercing terrain and darkness over more than 2 miles to peer at their destination. He stiffened in alarm at what he saw. His hand signs in return to Lynx and the other ANBU made them appear from the shadows all around the Hokage's party, moving into a tighter defensive cordon, while Sparrow leapt down to report to the Hokage himself. Sparrow landed beside Orochimaru and his adopted son Namake's Naruto, inside the invisible circle of space that was usually afforded to the pair. The ANBU avoided getting close without a reason because Naruto's monstrous chakra swamped their ability to sense anything else, and everyone else in the Hokage's party did it because they were terrified of the Jinchuriki. Some villages treated their Jinchuriki like pariahs, but Orochimaru was more practical and far less fearful. When Naruto's father and mother had died stopping the Kyuubi's rampage, Orochimaru and his wife Mitarashi Anko had raised the boy as their own. Now 17, he was among the most powerful of the Jinchuriki, a terror on the battlefield, and as ruthless as he was loyal to Orochimaru. Konohagakure was no stranger to shinobi with red eyes, but Naruto's slit pupils glowed, the result of years of training to harness the Kyuubi's power. Even Sparrow, a powerful, experienced jounin, had to suppress a shudder when that whisker-marked face turned his way. "Report," Orochimaru commanded, far from oblivious to the tension of his bodyguards and the change in formation. "Smoke is rising from Sunagakure, and their east gate is in ruins, Hokage-sama," Sparrow reported quietly. "TCH," Orochimaru said in irritation, before muttering something under his breath that Sparrow didn't catch, save for the word Akatsuki. "Leave a few men to accompany my attendants, the rest of you, with me. We're jumping to the embassy." Sparrow signaled, and Bor and Ren dropped back to escort the hangers-on into the city. The rest of the ANBU, Sparrow, Lynx, Ul and Mole, closed in around the Hokage and Naruto, laying a hand on the shoulder of one or the other as they joined hands. Sparrow felt the skin of his palm start to burn slightly just from touching Naruto, but it was a small pain, easily ignored. Lynx, also touching Naruto, showed no reaction either. Ul, a short man with dark hair caught up in a standing spike like the top of a pineapple, and Mole, a woman with long, blonde hair and a full bust, touched Orochimaru. Naruto's chakra surged. "Hiraishin no Jutsu," he called, and all 6 vanished in a flash. All of them were used to being subjected to the legendary Namake's teleportation technique Naruto had learned from his father's scrolls, so the disorientation faded in moments. Uchiha Hisomo, the gray-haired ambassador to Sunagakure, rose from his desk as they appeared and bowed to Orochimaru. "Hokage-sama, I'm glad you chose to arrive this way." The Kazekage's brother ordered the gate sealed. Naruto sneered in contempt, while Orochimaru's yellow eyes narrowed. "What happened?" Hisomo spread his hands. "The San Shinobi are on edge and aren't saying much, but my contacts indicate that there was an attempt on the Kazekage's life just hours ago, accompanied by a diversionary attack on the east gate that seems to have left a number of Sunagakure's ninja dead." Then Hisomo let some of his anger show. "My Jonin security chief is missing, and the San ANBU have arrested her genin team, including Uchiha Amaya. All they'll tell me is that they were caught up in the attempt on the Kazekage. I've demanded to be allowed to see them as strongly as I am able, but they've ignored me so far." Lynx stiffened in indignation, and Sparrow had to control his own reaction, though to a different piece of the report. "Ten is missing? Fear he couldn't allow to show gripped his chest. Orochimaru shook his head. Well, that won't do. Naruto, take Sparrow and Mole, find those genin and why they've been detained. Don't start a war, but make it clear that Tsunagakure doesn't detain my people without a good reason. Naruto nodded with a savage grin, and Sparrow suddenly pitted whoever the Sananbu had on guard at Tsunagakure's prison. You two are coming with me, and the ambassador, Orochimaru, continued to Lynx and Owl. Take us to the Kazekage. Sparrow didn't catch the rest of the conversation, following Naruto and Mole out the window and across the rooftops. The Sand Shinobi were out in force, twitchy and armed to the teeth, but they knew what Naruto's chakra felt like, and weren't about to mess with him without direct orders. There were so many breakable things around: shops, people, the city of Tsunagakure. So they made it to the prison unmolested, where their path was blocked by half a dozen Sananbu, as well as a hard-eyed blonde woman with her hair caught up in four tails and a large metal fan in her grasp. Where are they, Temari? Naruto growled when he came to a halt in front of her. Temari's eyes widened and she swallowed hard but didn't give ground. I'm sorry, Namake-sama, to whom are you referring? Don't play games with me, Temari. You arrested one of our genin teams. You're going to tell me why and let us in to see them, or you're going to be repairing a whole lot more than your East Gate. Temari shook her head stubbornly. They were found with the Kazekage after he was attacked and wounded by an unknown assailant, possibly their sensei, and their story doesn't add up. They're going nowhere until we get the truth. Naruto grinned, baring his fangs. Someone beat Gaara? That's priceless. Temari and the Sananbu stiffened at the words, but he continued. It wasn't Tenten, though. She's nowhere near strong enough. So how about this, you let me in and I'll get a straight answer out of the little shits. Temari started to shake her head. The other option is I tear your prison apart to find them and you need a new prison and some new ANBU. The Hokage told me not to start a war, so I'd prefer the first option, but I will be going inside. How much of this building is standing and free of bloodstains when I leave is entirely up to you. Shock was plain on Temari's face, and anger. The ANBU behind her drew their weapons, and Sparrow settled into the gentle fist stance with resignation as Mole's hands filled with poison sunban. He didn't want to kill Sand Ninja. They weren't an enemy of the Hyuga or Konohagakure. But he knew that Orochimaru wouldn't allow any other village to detain an Uchiha, especially one who was young and female. Naruto knew it too, and Sparrow sighed as red chakra started to visibly pour from Naruto's skin, forming the fox cloak around him. The Sananbu leapt forward, only to be hit by a pair of massive chakra arms that extended from the fox cloak and slammed them into the wall, pinning them. Naruto moved forward with impossible quickness, trapping Temari's fan between their bodies and grabbing her throat, lifting her off of her feet. A kunai appeared in her hand and plunged toward his arm, only to break in two when it hit the fox cloak. You must really care nothing for all the ninja of your village who are about to die, Naruto said as more Sananbu appeared from the prison. Struggling for breath, Temari looked in Naruto's eyes and saw death. Grimacing, she choked out "Stand down" to the Sananbu despite his grip on her neck. Naruto let go and she staggered back, coughing. Sparrow could see the red burn mark in the shape of a hand where Naruto's fox cloak had seared her skin. Fine, you can see them. Kami, I hope I'm there to watch when someone kills you, Temari said bitterly, her voice hoarse. Naruto grinned. You'll be waiting a while. No one's strong enough to kill me. Temari glared at him but didn't say another word as she stalked into the prison with Naruto, Sparrow, and Mole close behind. Before they were halfway into the prison, Sparrow located the three genin with his Byakugan, but since Temari was taking them in the right direction, he didn't say anything. Each was in a separate interrogation room. Even with the loss of color and texture that came with looking through a wall, Sparrow could tell that Isamu Ken's face was bruised, and as he watched, an exchange of words between the boy and his interrogator resulted in another punch to the brash redhead's face. There was no interrogator in Aburame Keed's room, and Sparrow guessed that the thousands of tiny chakra signatures crawling over every surface in the room were the reason. The girl herself was curled up in a corner, flinching every time she heard Ken's interrogator hit him. Uchiha Amaya was simply sitting in the chair in her room, glaring at the interrogator with her arms crossed and saying nothing. Sparrow was relieved to see that at least they hadn't been roughing her up. That probably would start a war. When Naruto glanced his way, Sparrow made a few gestures. The Jinchuriki knew the ANBU sign language. "Oh, Temari," Naruto said casually, "unless those kids really did do something pretty serious, I'm going to kill the idiots who are working them over." Temari looked alarmed, but there wasn't much she could say. When they reached the interrogation cells, Naruto simply opened the door to Amaya's room and walked in. A moment later, the interrogator flew out and hit the opposite wall, hard. Mole followed Naruto, while Sparrow went down 2 doors, yanked it open and struck the Tenketsu at the base of the interrogator's neck with chakra-laced fingers. The man fell to the floor, temporarily paralyzed. "Come," Sparrow said to the bruised boy in green, who hopped up from the floor, shouted Yash, and followed the Leaf ANBU. Sparrow knew enough about the Aburame clan's members, especially young ones, to not open the door until the girl had her bugs under control. "Reel in your bugs, girl. You're safe." When she didn't obey, Sparrow sighed. She probably didn't recognize his voice. Seeing the problem, Ken called out, "It's okay, kid, he's a leaf ninja." At that, the girl's bugs began returning to their hive, and Sparrow opened the door. "Come," he said again, and the girl got to her feet, almost tackling Ken, hugging him in the hallway. "Are you okay?" she said, wincing at the sight of Ken's bruises. He grinned despite a split lip. "This is nothing to a future Hokage." Sparrow gestured, and the 2 genin followed him into the room with Amaya, Naruto, Temari and Mole, the latter of whom was sitting in the interrogator's chair, just breaking an intense gaze with Amaya. "She's been telling them the truth for the last 2 hours, Mole observed with disgust. They were heading to the embassy when they saw the Kazekage fall from the sky and found Tenten where he landed. She was probably doing the same, the spot was right between her apartment and there. Tenten ordered them to hide in a basement with him and keep quiet while she drew away whoever attacked the Kazekage. They did so until the Sand ANBU found and arrested them." Looking relieved now that Leaf Ninja had arrived, Amaya blurted out, "Please, you have to help our sensei. The guys who were after the Kazekage were really strong, even we could feel their chakra." Ken and Keed nodded in affirmation. "Sensei hinged into the Kazekage and got them to chase her, we heard it, you have to find her." Naruto was glaring daggers at Temari, who looked back defiantly. "We don't have Yamanaka clan mind readers here," she said defensively, pointing at Mole, who was managing to smirk even under a full face mask. "Finding the truth is a little harder when we can't just dredge people's minds." "Whatever. Mole, check the other 2 and tell Temari what you find, then bring the genin to the embassy." Naruto headed for the door. "Namake-sama?" Sparrow ventured. "Permit me to attempt to track down Tenten and her assailants." Naruto paused to consider it and then shrugged. "Go ahead. Report back when you find out more about what happened." Sparrow nodded, got the location of the site from the genin and then headed out, flying across Sunagakure at top speed. "Please don't be dead, Tenten," he thought. Finding the spot where Gaara had fallen was easy. Following the trail from there was harder. The chase had quickly taken to the rooftops, and without the Byakugan, Sparrow would never have been able to spot the widely spread footprints, Tenten's delicate feet pursued by much heavier treads that didn't even look human. Further along he started to find discarded kunai and shuriken, ones he recognized as bearing the mark of Tenten's father, the blacksmith who made most of her weapons. Urgency and worry growing inside him, Sparrow followed the signs of a running battle to the edge of the village. He was aware of the San ANBU following him, but put them out of his mind, racing out onto the dunes. There were more signs of struggle where the trail ended, and Sparrow's Byakugan picked up something large buried beneath the sand. His heart was in his throat as he dropped to his knees and dug it up. He felt a bit of relief when his hands found paper, not cloth or flesh, and he dragged Tenten's main sealing scroll from the sand. It was slashed and burned in places, and there was some blood on it, though not much. Relief that it hadn't been her body and worry at the knowledge that Tenten would never have left her precious scroll behind willingly warred within him. He pushed his Byakugan out to its limit, but there were no other signs, above or below the sand. The most logical conclusion was also of great concern to him. The Kazekage had been attacked by a flight-capable opponent. No one had walked or run away from this spot, so it was reasonable to conclude from the lack of blood or a body that the Kazekage's attacker or attackers had taken Tenten alive, possibly still believing her to be the Kazekage. That was bad, but as unambu a thought as it was, Sparrow was glad she wasn't dead. There was a chance she could be found, rescued. Grimly, Sparrow shouldered the massive scroll and turned back to Sunagakure. A pair of sand anbu landed in front of him. That's evidence. Hand it over, the one with a spider mask demanded. This is a precious possession of the leaf ninja who saved your Kazakage's life, and you'll take it over my dead body, Sparrow said calmly, and the killing intent suddenly radiating from him was enough to give the sand anbu pause. I'll be bringing it to the Kanahagakure embassy, and I'm sure you'll be allowed to examine it, but I'm not letting you take it, Sparrow continued, giving them an option to back down. They took it, parting silently to let them pass. He headed for the embassy, and the sand anbu followed. I'll keep it safe until you're with us again, 1010. I promise, Hyuga Niji swore, adjusting the sparrow mask as he raced across the desert sands. 1010 sat in a windowless cell of bare stone, the cold from the floor and air seeping into her skin. She gazed into the middle distance, not really looking at anything. She already knew everything about the cell. 3 featureless walls, the fourth interrupted by a rather sturdy steel door with no handle or hinges on her side. Ceiling, solid stone save for the single light in a barred recess. Floor, unadorned save for the hole in one corner for waste. All that wouldn't have made it a particularly difficult cell to escape. Madogai didn't allow genin he instructed to participate in the Chunin exam until they could open at least one of the 8 inner gates. 1010 wasn't a taijutsu savant like Rock Lee, who could open 5 gates while he was still a genin, but she'd managed to open the first gate to qualify for the Chunin exams. Now she could access 2 gates if necessary. Those would be enough to batter down a steel door, even if it probably would break several her bones in the process. What was keeping 1010 in the cell were the shackles encircling her wrists and ankles, the chains connected so she couldn't raise her hands above her waist while standing. Each of the 4 heavy bands was carved with intricate seals. If she wasn't currently wearing them, she could have been impressed with the level of Fuinjutsu mastery their creator possessed. She'd learned a lot just by studying the chains since waking up wearing them. They were far more sophisticated than the simple chakra ropes usually used to restrain shinobi prisoners. The seals on the manacles actually absorb any chakra beyond the body's natural flow that passed through the limbs they restrained, and used that chakra to punish the wearer. 1010 had discovered this when experimentally attempting a weak ninjutsu had not only failed but made the metal hot enough to blister her skin. 1010 suspected that opening an inner gate would feed the damned things enough chakra to burn her hands and feet clean off before she could break the chains. Sitting there, 1010 shivered slightly. The cell and the stones were cool enough to be uncomfortable, especially without clothes. She'd woken up naked save for the chains and discovered she'd been searched thoroughly. They'd even found the pair of tiny senbon she hid in her mouth. Being naked on its own didn't bother 1010, it was a standard tactic to put kunoichi prisoners off balance, and she'd dealt with worse at the hands of Kanahagakure's torture and interrogation unit during the torture resistance portion of the Jounin exams, and passed with flying colors. She just wished they'd given her a damned blanket or something if they were going to leave her to stew. Being able to tolerate the cold wasn't the same as not feeling it. Food and water were slipped through a slot under the door at regular intervals. She'd refused to touch it at first, shoving it back out rather than risk being drugged, but after the first day and a half it was drink or die. To her surprise, there was nothing untoward added to the food or drink that she could detect. The manacles confused her too, when she thought about them. They prevented her escape, but not her death, which should have been a consideration if her captors wanted something from her. The shackles wouldn't prevent her from performing a suicide jutsu. A good leaf shinobi probably would have done so already, but 1010 admitted to herself that she wasn't quite that eager to die. No one had come to ask 1010 any questions yet either. She hadn't even seen any of her captors since waking up in the cell, and it had been almost a week, but the interrogation, and probably torture, had to be coming. 1010 knew they couldn't have kept her alive for anything else. She didn't have a clan, or even a family wealthy enough to ransom her. She didn't have a Kekkei Genkai to extract by surgery or forced pregnancy. The one possibility she tried hard not to think about was the rumors about the experiments the Hokage did on living shinobi. 1010 vowed that the first hint that she got about being prisoner of someone like that and she would choose death rather than live as someone's sick experiment. As though the uncomfortable thoughts summoned it, the lock clicked and the door swung open for the first time, a male silhouette filling the doorway. The light outside was brighter than she'd seen in a week, and Tenten squinted as the man stepped inside. When she could see his features, she found herself looking at a tall man with short, spiky red hair and piercing brown eyes. He wore the same black cloak with red clouds as Deidara and the puppeteer had, and he looked to be in his mid-30s, a few laugh lines around his eyes. On his forehead he wore a Sunagakir Hitayate, but the slash across the middle like Deidara's told her he was a Nuknin powerful enough that he didn't care who knew. His eyes moved over her body blatantly, and she forced herself not to react or cover herself. She wouldn't show any discomfort at being unclothed before him. The man had no obvious weapons, though the cloak could conceal a number of them. She could feel the strength of his chakra, every bit as intense as the two she had already faced. They just stared at each other for several minutes, neither of them speaking or moving, until Tenten burst out irritably, "What?" A confident smile spread across the man's face. "My name is Sasori," he said. Tenten blinked. She'd talked with enemy ninja before, but the conversations usually didn't start with introductions. Then the name hit her. Another first page of the bingo book name, Sunagakirs this time. Sasori of the Red Sands. S-Class Nuknin and Master Puppeteer. "You look different without the armor," Tenten commented with forced levity. "What are you guys, a bingo book reunion tour? Do you have some of Cloud and Mist's most wanted running around in emo bathrobes too?" Sasori laughed at that. "You are an unusual kunoichi. Clever, spirited, and you control your emotions almost as well as you control your chakra. You hide your fear well. That's good." Then his face lost all trace of humor, his eyes sharp and serious as a kunai to the throat. "The ones who are afraid before we even get started are never any fun." He stepped inside the cell, looming over Tenten, and the door swung shut behind him. "Let's get started, shall we?" Tenten couldn't suppress the shudder that ran down her spine. Chapter 3, The Sleeper Awakens. Orochimaru, the Yandame Hokage of Kanahagakure, signed the last document on his desk and dropped it onto the finished pile with satisfaction. Sometimes after a few hours of paperwork, the former Sannin pictured his old sensei Sarutobi Hiruzen laughing at him from the afterlife. Orochimaru delegated where he could, but there were plenty of decisions that were too important for subordinates or a shadow clone to make. That didn't make them any less boring, though. A delicate pair of hands landed on his shoulders, kneading the tense muscles there for a minute, and a smile crossed Orochimaru's pale face. "Maybe I am stuck with the paperwork, old man, but I've got all the power too, and the perks are more than worth it." A pretty face with hard eyes and topped by spiky purple hair moved around from the back of his chair. Anko leaned in, and the pair exchanged a quick kiss. "Are we done for the day?" he asked. In addition to being his wife, Anko was his closest advisor. There was no one Orochimaru relied on completely, but the purple-haired young woman he had molded into a loyal right hand and ideal mate since childhood was among those he trusted most. "Almost," she said. "Word just came in from Sparrow's team. They were sent to check out that suspected Akatsuki base on the border with Iwagakure." Orochimaru nodded. "When do they expect to be back?" "They are back. Their report was dropped at the gatehouse." "Why is Sparrow not reporting to me in person?" Anko grinned. "Probably because of what he found." Orochimaru waited for elaboration for a moment before giving Anko a playful smack on the rear. "Details, woman." She laughed. The base had been abandoned by the Akatsuki, so they didn't find much in the way of material intelligence, but one of the prisoners the terrorists left behind wasn't quite dead. Anko glanced at the report. "It was one of ours, Tenten, a Jounin who's been missing for a while. The medic's report notes that it was a near thing. She was almost dead of dehydration when they found her. Sparrow took her straight to the hospital at the medic's insistence." Then Anko grinned. "He probably would have anyways. He has a past with the woman. They were on a genin squad together." Orochimaru nodded, a frown crossing his face. Tenten. That name sounds familiar. She was presumed captured 4 months ago by the Akatsuki after foiling that assassination attempt on the Kazekage. Anko flipped through a few pages of the medical report. "Damn. That's harsh even by our standards. They did a number on her before they left her to die." Orochimaru extended his hand and read the report when Anko handed it to him. "Ah. I remember now. Tenten was the embassy's security chief at the time. She did us and our ally a service saving the Kazekage from Akatsuki, and I'm inclined to be grateful, but she's also been in the hands of the enemy for 4 months, and the Akatsuki have never been sloppy enough to leave live witnesses, Orochimaru observed. We have to consider the possibility that they compromised her. Once Sparrow leaves her side, take Inoichi and go through her head with a fine-toothed comb. If the Akatsuki broke or subverted her, then kill her quietly and we'll give her a hero's funeral and a space on the monument. Anko shivered but nodded. As you wish, she murmured before departing to see his orders carried out. Divested of his Anbu gear, Niji was himself, dressed in the flowing white garb traditionally worn by the Hyuga around Kanahagakure. He sat in a chair by Tenten's bedside as she slept, and for in her arm to replace much-needed fluids and nutrients. Cleaned and with her wounds treated, she looked almost human again, though her face was still gaunt and he could tell she'd been starved for some time and had lost muscle weight, her limbs thinner than he had ever seen them. Still, the medical ninja were confident that her hands would heal cleanly, and none of her injuries were crippling. She would have a disheartening number of scars, particularly the poorly healed marks of the whip down her back, but she was going to recover. She would be okay, physically. The medics hadn't been as reassuring about her mental health, but Niji swore he would do whatever it took to see her recover, in body and mind. It was dark outside, and Niji was weary from a long day of running to get Tenten back to Kanahagakure, but he fought sleep. The previous 4 months had been hell. No hints or clues as to Tenten's fate had emerged. The Kazekage had been able to identify his assailant as Deidara, a Nukenin formerly of Iwagakure, but no trace of the man or his accomplice had been found. Even Rock Lee and Guy had concluded after a few months that Tenten was probably dead at the hands of her captors, but Niji had refused to give up hope. When Tenten's family had held a memorial for her, he'd refused to attend, refused to believe she was dead. He wouldn't believe it until he saw the body. Instead, he plunged into his work, volunteering for any mission that had anything to do with the mysterious terrorists known as Akatsuki, after his status in ANBU had allowed him to access the secret intelligence files on the shadowy organization. Niji sustained himself by nurturing a fierce hatred for the secretive band of powerful Nukenin whose goals were shrouded in secrecy. When a Leaf Border Patrol including one of Niji's Hyuga clansmen had stumbled across an underground complex on the border with Iwagakure believed to belong to the Akatsuki, the Hokage had not hesitated to act. Niji, as Sparrow, had been picked to lead the investigation team. Finding Tenten had been an amazing relief, but seeing what the terrorists had done to her stoked his hatred higher than ever. I'll kill them all, Tenten. I swear it. Every last one of them will die for what they've done to you, Niji said to his sleeping teammate. A youthful statement of loyalty, Niji. Just don't let it cloud your judgment, a deep voice spoke from the room's doorway. Guy-sensei. Niji said, rising to his feet and turning to face the older green-clad shinobi. Guy's usual brilliant smile was replaced by a thoughtful frown as he looked at his former students. Technically they were both jounin, the same rank as Guy, but he would probably always be sensei to them. What brings you back? Niji asked. Guy had visited earlier in the day, along with Rock Lee, Tenten's genin, and her parents and siblings. She'd only come out of surgery that afternoon, and hadn't woken up yet. Now Guy did smile wryly. Visiting hours are over and you need to leave, but you've been putting out enough killing intent that the nurses are all too afraid to come in here and chase you out. Guiltily, Niji reined in the anger that had been radiating off of him. Sorry. It's just, Guy held up a hand. I understand your youthful feelings of righteous anger, Niji. But none of us will be exacting vengeance for Tenten's treatment tonight. Come, you need to rest or you'll be no good to her come morning. She should have friendly faces nearby when she wakes. Niji rubbed his face. I don't know if I can sleep right now, sensei, he admitted. When we found her, I could see everything they did to her, and now I see it every time I close my eyes. Guy considered that. He didn't have the Byakugan or access to Tenten's medical report, but he did possess the grim knowledge of what was often done to captured kunoichi during efforts to break their will. Then let me treat you to a drink, Niji. Or several. Niji considered that and then nodded. That's probably a bad idea, but right now I don't care. Following his former teacher, Niji left the hospital to find a bar and hopefully consume enough sake to forget what he'd seen in that abandoned Akatsuki base, at least for one night. Once Niji was far enough from the hospital to be out of the Byakugan's range, two shinobi slipped into Tenten's hospital room through the window. The taller of the pair, a man in his 40s with long blonde hair caught in a ponytail, stepped up to the bedside. Carefully, he removed his gloves and placed one hand on Tenten's forehead. "This is the part of the torture and interrogations job I hate," Yamanaka Inoichi commented idly as his chakras snaked into Tenten's brain and began sifting through memories. "This poor woman has been violated enough by our enemies without allies getting in on the act." "Can't say I'm wild about it either," Anko agreed, standing by the door and keeping an eye out for roaming nurses or anyone looking at the window. "Tenten deserves a medal for surviving even if they did break her, but you know we have to be sure the Akatsuki didn't leave any traps in her head ready to spring on us." Inoichi grunted a wordless affirmation and then was silent for almost half an hour, unmoving with his face set in a look of concentration. When his hand left Tenten's forehead, his expression turned to one of shock. "I'm honestly surprised. She fought them to the bitter end. They left her to die because she wouldn't break after months of torture." "Are you kidding?" Anko asked in disbelief. "She'd resigned herself to killing the girl on Orochimaru's orders. She didn't think a fresh 18-year-old Jonin could have held out for 4 months against the Akatsuki." Inoichi shook his head. "She gave them nothing. Her mind is scarred, and a lot of her memories are, understandably, scattered. Enough pain over enough time will do that, but she didn't talk, and she has enough memories of her captors that I recognized faces and I can time when they were at that base." He'd already removed a pad and pen from his vest and was writing down details before the memories faded. Daidara's accomplice in the attack on the Kazekage was Sasori of the Red Sand. Sasori and that psycho Kakuzu from Takigakure did most of the interrogating and torturing. When Inoichi was finished writing, he handed the pages to Anko. "We need more kunoichi like this one. I hope the Hokage realizes what a waste losing her would be." Anko nodded. "Orochimaru-sama will be glad that she remained loyal. I'll make sure he knows." The pair departed as silently as they had arrived. Sunlight falling across Tenten's face slowly woke her up. For a moment she just stared at the plain white ceiling. "Where am I?" Then she sat bolt upright. "Niji." Tenten gasped as pain rippled through her body at the sudden movement, muted but present. Hey, don't strain yourself. You're fine. You're safe," a calm male voice spoke, strong but gentle hands on her shoulders easing her back down onto the hospital bed. Tenten started to panic a bit as she got a glimpse of dark eyes, silver hair, and a purple medic's uniform looming over her, until her eyes latched onto the leaf Hitayate wrapped around his arm. "Hyuga Niji was by your side all day yesterday," he said comfortingly. "They had to drag him out of here to get some sleep. I'm sure he'll be back soon. I'm home," she managed weakly, coughing. The silver-haired medic picked up a small juice box with a straw in it and held it to her mouth. Realizing how thirsty she was, Tenten drained it. "Kanahagakure Shinobi Hospital, Recovery Ward." "You're safe," he told her. Relief filled Tenten, and she could feel moisture welling up in her eyes. "My name's Yukushi Kabuto, I'm the medical ninja charged with overseeing your recovery. You're going to be back on your feet in no time." Nodding, Tenten began taking stock of her injuries. Her legs seemed to be fine, just weak and sluggish. When she couldn't move her hands, she pulled them from under the blankets with alarm, looking with dismay at the rigid casts on her fingers and hands. Memories of the delicate bones being broken one by one flashed through her head and she shuddered. "Kabuto," she said, a note of worry in her voice. "Don't worry," he said reassuringly. "The breaks are set and healing cleanly, your chakra network will heal with them. When the casts come off in about a month and a half, you'll retain full manual dexterity and ability in forming hand signs." Tenten sighed in relief. Her hands were her livelihood, and permanent damage would be devastating. "Your stamina and strength took a hit from the lack of food and exercise, but I have a physical therapy plan ready. I'll have you back in fighting shape by the time your hands heal." Tenten nodded, and he hesitated. "We did what we could in surgery to minimize the scarring on your back, but I'm afraid it is extensive." Tenten shook her head. The memories seemed more distant now, the fire of the lashes shredding her skin reduced to a dull ache and slight itch beneath the bandages. If scars are the worst that comes out of this, I'll be fine. If her body still worked when she healed, she could live with cosmetic damage. Then something else occurred to her, and she pressed one cast-wrapped hand to her stomach. That is the worst to come out of this, right? Kabuto lowered his face, sunlight from outside reflecting off of his glasses and hiding his eyes, his brow furrowing with anger for a moment before it smoothed out. Your kunoichi seal was tampered with, but it held, he assured her quietly, eyes darting to the blankets over her hip, where active duty kunoichi had a medical seal tattooed into their skin to prevent pregnancy. No surprises. Tenten nodded at that reassurance and put it from her mind, or tried to, at least. She was startled to feel tears falling down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Kabuto-san, she said as she swiped at them with her sleeve. It's unbecoming of me. Don't apologize, he reassured her. Kabuto moved to the room's door, his body hiding his actions from Tenten as he locked it. Then he moved around the bed, tugging the window's light curtains open, giving Tenten a view of the park outside. When Tenten had left Kanahagakure for her posting in Sunagakure, the trees had been green and blooming. Now the branches were bare, and the winter breeze shook them. You missed the turning of the leaves, Kabuto observed conversationally. Once they were green, but I watched as they faded, withered, and fell. Turning of the leaves. Tenten blinked, a wave of lightheadedness washing over her. Once they were green. Suddenly she felt dizzy. They faded, withered, and fell, faintly, pain stabbed at her temples. Kabuto was standing over her bed now, his eyes strangely intent. Kabuto? Tenten whispered. With our diligence, the leaves can be healthy again. The long winter must end, he said softly. The leaves can be healthy again, long winter must end. Each phrase hammered into Tenten's head and triggered a new wave of dizziness and nausea. When the word end fell from his lips, Tenten groaned, pressing her wounded hands to her head as a spike of pain shot through her brain, followed by a wave of lassitude. What did you do to me? She gasped. Kabuto didn't answer immediately, and Tenten's eyes shot wide open. Something shifted inside her head. Sasori of the Red Sand was a master of Fuinjutsu, perhaps greater than the legendary Jiraiya. New memories, her true memories of the last 4 months, flooded into Tenten's head as Kabuto's code phrases unlocked the string of breathtakingly delicate seals Sasori had placed in Tenten's mind. Sasori's skill had bordered on art, disguising the seals as mental scarring from months of brutal torture, convincing enough to fool even the vaunted skills of the Yamanaka clan. When her gaze focused on Kabuto again, she was a different person, sharp, confident, and unafraid. Kami, that's a trip. Sasori didn't warn me how disorienting 2 sets of memories would be. You're my contact, she asked. Kabuto nodded. I am. Your orders will come from Sasori-sama, of course, and I'll pass them on to you unless he feels the need to reach out to you directly. Understood. Glancing at her mangled hands again, and feeling the healing skin on her back, she grimaced. Kakuzu enjoyed doing all this a little too much, I think. Tell me it worked. Kabuto nodded. Flawlessly. Your Hyuga friend found you on the brink of death after the Akatsuki allowed the leaf to find that base. Daidara-sama was furious about how long it took them to find you. He was close to scrapping the mission and pulling you out himself. A secretive smile flickered across Tenten's face at that. Sasori-sama's seals fooled the clan head of the Yamanaka, who snuck in here last night while you were still in recovery to pick your brain, he told her, irritation coloring his tone. From what I've heard this morning, you're being lauded as a hero and the Hokage plans to pin a medal on you as soon as you are well enough to walk over to his office. Kabuto adjusted his glasses. You should be proud. The Akatsuki haven't been able to insert a spy into Kanahagakure's ninja corps without suspicion in a decade. Tenten smiled sweetly. I don't know what you're talking about, Kabuto. Everyone knows I'm the same person I've always been, a good, hard-working little leaf kunoichi, killing and risking death for benefit of the monster that soils the office of the Hokage just by occupying it. The silver-haired medic chuckled. How could I forget? Then his features became serious. For now your only mission is recovery. By the time you're ready to be discharged, I'll have more for you. Then his head tilted slightly and he moved to the door. You've got guests coming, he said as he unlocked it and slipped out. Tenten nodded, closing her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were once again wary, uncertain eyes just starting to hope. The eyes of a recovering victim of horrific abuse, and certainly not the eyes of an enemy spy who had never felt surer of her path. Then the happy, relieved faces of her mother, father, and all 4 of her older siblings came through the door, and she was smiling, and giving, and receiving careful hugs. We shouldn't have to live and die by the whims of an unfit Hokage, she thought silently. She smiled when a few of her young nieces and nephews came into the room to see their ninja auntie, crawling up onto her bed to sign the casts on her arms. They shouldn't have to grow up in the village I did. There is another way. She knew that now, all thanks to the Akatsuki. 4 months earlier. Let's get started, shall we? Tenten tried not to flinch as the cell door swung closed, trapping her naked, chained and vulnerable with Sasori of the Red Sand, Sunagakir's most feared Nuke. It doesn't matter what you do to me, I won't betray my village. So sure, let's get started. I'm glad to hear it, Sasori replied. You won't believe me when I tell you this, but I don't want you to betray your village. I want you to save it. Well, that's great, unchain me and I'll get right back to that. It's not quite that simple, Sasori said regretfully. It never is, Tenten said sourly, forcing herself to relax and lean back against the wall. Go ahead and start with the threats, the torture, whatever you have planned. I'm going to disappoint you. I don't know as much as you think, and I won't tell you what I do. I disagree, Sasori said, crouching near her. You know a great deal. Not about my organization, certainly, or you'd realize how wrong you're reading this situation, but you know quite a bit about your village's past, and about truths that few even in the shinobi world possess. I don't know what you're talking about, Tenten said, uneasy. None of the mock interrogations in training had gone like this. Kanahagakure's training focused around threats, drugs, and fists or blades applied to sensitive areas of the body more than talking around in circles. I think you do, Sasori replied. He reached into his robe, and Tenten managed to avoid tensing up. Here come the needles and thumbscrews. But instead he only removed a small leather-bound book from his cloak. Tenten's eyes narrowed as she recognized her journal. They raided my apartment? He placed it on the floor, then removed 2 more similar leather-bound books and put them beside the first. In the dim light, it took Tenten a moment to notice that the spine of each book was marred with 4 small scorch marks where the seals she had created were located. That meant he'd seen her real journals, not the years of superficial fluff she'd hidden her true thoughts and knowledge behind. Not good. Tenten's eyes moved from the books back to Sasori's calm face. And there's the fear, Sasori observed sadly as he looked into Tenten's eyes. Not of me, though, which would be understandable, fear of your Hokage and the knowledge of what he'd do if he knew what was in these books. He would kill me. Slowly, probably painfully, denied the mercy of death until he was certain I hadn't shared what I learned with anyone else. Tenten swallowed hard and then shook her head. That's not enough. At Sasori's curious glance, she elaborated. The Hokage would kill me for what's in those books. But that's just because he's a bastard. If I betray my oaths as a shinobi of Kanahagakure, that's a whole different level of reprisal. He wouldn't just kill me, he'd kill my whole family. That's what happens to leaf ninja who betray the village, unless their relatives are as highly placed as Uchiha Itachi's, and mine aren't. Tenten paused. If you've read my journals, you know all this. So why are we having this conversation? What is that oath you've sworn to uphold? Tenten's eyes narrowed. You know what it is, you've already betrayed it. The structure is the same in each village. I do know, and don't consider myself to have betrayed Sunagakure, Sasori acknowledged, but I want to hear it from you. To defend Kanahagakure and serve the Hokage. So what is a shinobi to do when the 2 pieces of that oath can't be upheld at once? Tenten said nothing, but Sasori continued. What happens when the village needs to be defended from the Kage? Doesn't happen. Come now, we both know better than that. Kirigakure hasn't had a Mizukichi that the villagers didn't need to be protected from. Kanahagakure had a better run, 3 good Kages is more than any of the other villages can claim, but the Yondaime Hokage is unfit to rule and we both know it. Yes, Orochimaru is a stain and he disgraces the uniform he wears. So what? Tenten demanded angrily. Here's a piece of recent history from Kanahagakure that you might not know. Since the end of the Third Shinobi War, twice as many Leaf Ninja have fallen by the Hokage's hand than by foreign enemies. When the ANBU aren't listening, I've heard other jounin talk about how our village is becoming the bloody leaf. The graveyard is full of ninja who opposed Orochimaru, and their families are lying right next to them. So I'm sorry if you thought you were going to convince me to help you scheme against the Hokage. I won't, and you might as well kill me. Everything you've just said is true. It's true in the other villages as well. The Kages have found a peace based on tyranny and bloodshed to be profitable and safer for them. They're free to focus on maintaining iron control over their own villages because they're not fighting wars anymore. Together, they're more powerful than the daimyos, and they know it. What if I told you there was a better way, a way to dethrone the tyrants and create better leadership for all the villages? I'd call you a liar. It can't be done. A dozen lesser villages couldn't stand against them, and a few S-class Nupnines do not a revolution make. You couldn't even finish the Kazekage, and Orochimaru's pet Jinchuriki is stronger than the monster of the bloody sand. Hell, I'm a fresh jounin and I tricked you. Not exactly a ringing endorsement of your collective skill. Sasori smiled, not seeming offended in the least. You sell yourself far short, and you underestimate the Akatsuki, but I'm not asking you to take all this on faith. Get up, I want to show you something. Sasori rose to his feet, and the cell door opened, revealing Deidara, who handed Sasori a white robe. Tenten gingerly rose to her feet, and Sasori wrapped her in the robe, specially made to go over and around the chains. Tenten had to take short steps and couldn't raise her arms above her waist while standing, but after some adjustment she had no trouble following Sasori, Deidara falling in step behind her. Despite her skepticism, Tenten was curious what Sasori wanted to see. She didn't think there was anything the Nupnin could show her to convince her to betray the Hokage, but the more of her prison she saw, the better her chances of learning something important or escaping. So she followed without complaint, ready to listen if nothing else. Chapter 4: The Cost of Deception. 6 months after being discharged from the hospital and resuming her official duties as a jounin instructor and her unofficial work as an enemy spy, Tenten stood in the office of the Hokage, summoned there along with the other jounin sensei who had genin teams with at least a year's experience out of the academy. This year's Chunin exams will be held in Kumogakure in 3 months' time, Orochimaru informed them. I await your decisions on entering your teams. They answered in order of team number, as was tradition. Team 2's answer, Ebisu said as he stepped forward and placed a sealed envelope on the table. Anko, standing beside the Hokage's desk, took it and read the contents. Under the Sandaime Hokage, the instructors had announced their team's participation openly. Orochimaru had a different system, a test within a test. Jounin instructors informed him of their decision secretly, and after that the genin teams and their sensei had to try and figure out who else from their village they'd potentially be facing in the exam. Ebisu will enter his team, Tenten decided. Ebisu's genin, led by Sarutobi Konohamaru, the grandson of the Sandaime Hokage, had shown promise. Team 3's answer, Ganma announced, depositing his envelope with a swish of the sunbon gripped in his teeth. They will definitely be entered. Ganma had received one of the most unusual genin teams in recent memory, but no one denied they had been shaped into a formidable heavy combat unit. It was rare for relatives to be placed on the same team, but Ganma's genin were identical triplets, scions of the Inazuka clan. The three boys had been eerily in tune with each other since they were toddlers, and their clan combination techniques, now backed up by the three Nin-ken the brothers had bonded with, made them too powerful together to split up. Expectant gazes turned to Tenten. Team 4's answer, she said, handing Anko the envelope with the form entering her team in the exam. Anko's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. Tenten had expected skepticism. After her capture, Rock Lee had taken a leave of absence from the academy to train and watch over her students until a new jounin instructor could be found. They hadn't been able to take missions for months since Lee hadn't been a jounin at first. He'd actually passed the jounin exam towards the end of Tenten's captivity and would have become their permanent sensei if she hadn't returned. Ken had been thrilled to have Lee as their sensei, but Tenten's first visitors in the hospital after her family had been Amaya and Keed, who, after reassuring themselves that she was all right, begged her to save them from Kanahagakure's second green beast. Apparently, Lee and Ken's youthful embraces were just as visually disturbing as Guy and Lee's manhugs had been. Left to her own devices, Tenten would have played it safe and not risked her girls in an exam in a foreign village without another year of seasoning, but Kabuto had passed on orders from Sasori last week. He wanted her in Kumogakure for the Chunin exams. Ultimately, despite their youth, Tenten was confident that her students were capable of meeting the challenge. Amaya had activated her Sharingan on their first mission after Tenten returned to active status, a nasty fight with some bandits and a pair of Chunin-level Nukenin who lead them. Keat had been receiving extra lessons from her clan in the use of her Kakai bugs, and Ken had flourished under Rock Lee's tutelage, opening 3 inner gates by the time Lee was done with him. The time hadn't improved his fashion sense any, but he was a skilled taijutsu specialist, and unlike Lee, Ken had normal chakra coils and could perform basic ninjutsu. Naro Shikamaru, the only other Jonin Tenten's age who currently had a genin team, handed over his envelope, referring to the whole process as troublesome. Tenten honestly didn't know if Shikamaru would enter his team, which consisted of a young man from the Yamanaka clan, a kunoichi from the Akamichi clan, and another boy from one of the minor clans absorbed after the fall of Takigakure. They weren't much older than her students, and Shikamaru was impossible to get a read on, always had been. Team 6 will not compete, Sarutobi Asuma growled with a look of irritation on his face, not bothering to hand over an envelope. After a moment of stunned silence, some Jonin protested their exclusion while others looked relieved. Asuma's genin were 15 and the most experienced of any team under consideration. They were Hyuga Hanabi, a Byakugan user, Moroshir Tanai, a green-haired boy from a newly formed clan of Grass Kekiai Genkai users, and Narashimi, one of Shikamaru's shadow-wielding cousins. Tenten met Shikamaru's eyes and then both of them glanced at the room's last occupant, standing by the door. Asuma has withdrawn his team from competition in Kumogakure at my request, Hyuga Hayashi stated firmly. The Reikage has coveted the Byakugan for decades, and I will not send my daughter or any other member of my clan into his grasp. Those who hadn't understood before did now. Hayashi had lost his twin brother to Cloud's schemes when his eldest daughter was an infant. Orochimaru spoke up. As we are of course sensitive to the security concerns of the Hyuga clan, we will conduct a private evaluation of Asuma's team here in Kanahagakure after the exams, and promote his students internally as appropriate. Asuma still looked annoyed on behalf of his students, and Tenten could understand why. While merit promotions internal to the village produced most Chunin, and all of the Jounin, the Chunin exams were more than just a means of being promoted, they were a chance for aspiring elite shinobi to showcase their skills. The audience would include the daimyos, as well as the wealthy nobles and merchants who dispensed many of the most lucrative contracts to the villages and frequently requested specific shinobi. Forming connections with those prospective clients could land shinobi lucrative repeat business, or even prestigious and well-paid positions in the daimyo's personal guard. Asuma himself wore the white sash of the 12 Guardians and had served as the Fire Daimyo's guard in his youth. Those of you who have chosen to compete, make your squads ready for the exams. You all know the penalty for failing to reach the final round. Another of Orochimaru's rules once he became Hokage was that any genin team that failed to reach the Chunin exam's final round couldn't compete the following year, and any Jonin sensei whose teams failed twice in their career was barred from further instruction of future genin, a source of significant income and prestige. We leave for Kumogakure in 2 months. Dismissed, Orochimaru instructed them. The Jonin commanders filed out of the room. Tenten met her genin on training field 14 that afternoon. Ken showed up first, falling into his usual routine of habitual exercise until Amaya dropped from the trees, and Kid strolled out of the forest, hands in the pockets of her voluminous overcoat. So did you enter us in the Chunin exams, sensei? Amaya asked straight off. Tenten raised an eyebrow at the young Uchiha. What makes you think the entries have been decided? The teams from Kanahagakure entered wouldn't be announced publicly until the start of the exams. Amaya rolled her eyes. Half the village has heard Konohamaru bragging, going on about how he's going to win the Chunin exams and prove himself worthy of being Hokage. The Inuzuka brothers have also been quite vocal in congratulating themselves on their participation and predicting dire fates for their opponents, Keat added quietly. Ken was frowning. You have to enter us, sensei. I can't let Konohamaru get ahead of me. He's my rival in becoming Hokage. Ken. Tenten said patiently. Do you think Konohamaru and the Inuzuka boys are being wise, announcing to everyone that they've been entered in the exam? Well, yeah. Everyone has to acknowledge them as the strongest genin in the village if they're going to the exam. Amaya's eyes lit up in understanding. They're not being smart, sensei. They're not the only Leaf teams going, are they? Now everyone else who's going knows to prepare to face them. Keed nodded. They've been so loud that word might actually reach the embassies of the other villages, and then the foreign genin would be told, too. That's right, Tenten said, pleased. The entries are secret for a reason, and those boys have disadvantaged themselves for the sake of their pride. What place does pride have in a ninja's life? None, all three genin answered. It was something Tenten had drilled into them from day one. Confidence in one's skill and self-knowledge were essential for a ninja, but unwanted pride and arrogance were dangerous. The graveyards of hidden villages were full of the remains of proud young ninja. So did you enter us? Ken asked. Tenten looked at all three seriously. You know your abilities, and you know the other genin teams from our village. You should also note that this year's exams are being held in Kumogakure, a village that doesn't allow its own genin to complete until they've been in the field for 3 years, minimum. Every other team in this year's exam will be older and more experienced than you. Do you think you can perform well enough on a field like that to reach the final round? Remember that if you don't make it to the final round, you'll be barred from competing in the next exam. Next year's exams will be here in Kanahagakure, with a more favorable field of contestants. Amaya looked at Keed, who nodded, and Ken, who gave her a thumbs up. Our youthful strength will see us through. Amaya grimaced at that statement, but looked at Tenten steadily. I do. We're a team, and we've had great teachers. Tenten smiled. Good, she said quietly. Now I need all three of you need to look really disappointed, like I just told you that I didn't enter you this year. Ken's dismayed and confused look was completely genuine. Amaya, on the other hand, got it instantly and killed a grin, instead crossing her arms angrily. But sensei, we're ready for the Chunin exam. You know we are. Amaya's high voice carried clearly to the trees. This is a mistake, Keed said with a note of disappointment in her voice. Tenten noticed a handful of Kikai bugs dropping out of Keed's coat and flying away low to the grass. We don't get to go? Ken said, puzzled. Amaya stomped on his foot. Ow. What did you do that for? Oh, he said as he finally got it. That's not fair, sensei. If Konohamaru becomes Chunin before I do, I'll never catch up to him. Tenten let the genin argue and complain, replying to their shouts with observations that their emotional reactions prove they weren't ready. Eventually, her sense of two nearby hidden presences faded, and some of Keed's bugs returned. They're gone, sensei. It was Udan from Konohamaru's team, and one of the Inuzuka boys' dogs. Good work, Tenten congratulated them. So we are going to the exams? Ken asked hopefully. You are, yes, and your first assignment for the exams is to make sure no one finds out you're going. As far as anyone is concerned, even your families, I held you back from the exams. I am going to train all of you in preparation, but we're also going to maintain the pretense of being a normally operating team that isn't participating, so we'll take a few short missions to deflect suspicion. We're also not going to travel to Kumogakure with the Hokage's procession. That means no big parade and no servants setting up comfy tents, but it also gives us more time to train, and it means that your fellow Leaf genin won't know you're in the competition until they see your names on the roster. Meanwhile, you'll all be preparing to face them, and the foreign shinobi you're likely to encounter. Tenten reflected on the advantage they wouldn't even know they had, thanks to the Akatsuki. When Sasori had ordered her to take her team to the Chunin exams, she'd requested information on the competing genin teams from other villages. Sasori had delivered, and Kabuto had handed her some sealed folders just 2 days earlier, currently hidden in the safe in her apartment that ANBU didn't know about. She'd be able to prepare her students for everyone they'd face, not just the other ninja from Leaf. Amaya and Keed exchanged a glance. I don't know about the Aburame, but now that my Sharingan is active, my clan is expecting me to go to the exams, and they'll be upset with you if I tell them I'm not going. I don't want to cause trouble for you, sensei. If I tell them it's a secret, they won't spread it around. I'm not trying to impugn the honor of your clan, Amaya, but as shinobi you need to understand the only secret that is safe is one that's shared by as few people as possible. Chunin are privy to secrets that they can't share with their families. I know you trust your relatives, but do you trust all the servants on the Uchiha compound? The people who work underfoot are easy to forget, but they have eyes and ears, and a coin in their hand can buy what they learn. Amaya frowned, but nodded reluctantly. As for the ire of your relatives, let me worry about that, Tenten reassured them. Now, I want to know how each of you is planning to prepare for the exams. Yash! Ken exclaimed. I will run 500 laps around the training ground. Then I will do 1,000 push-ups. Then I will spar with Lee-sensei. Then Dashi trailed off when Tenten shook her head. Ken, I can say with a fair amount of certainty that your physical conditioning and taijutsu are better than just about any other genin out there. That doesn't mean you need to stop practicing, but you need to think about what's going to happen in the final rounds if you find yourself facing an opponent who doesn't fight head-on. What are you going to do against a mist ninja who's a genjutsu specialist without Amaya there to break the illusions? What if you have to fight genin from Iwagakure who can disappear underground, or a long-range specialist from the Cloud Village who's going to try and fry you with lightning jutsus before you ever get close enough to hit him? Tenten couched them as generic examples, but she knew from Sasori's reports that genin with those abilities would be in the exams. The other villages were fielding a strong batch of genin, but at least no one was entering any Jinchuriki this year, like they had for Tenten's first Chunin exam. Ken was looking troubled and thoughtful once she was finished. So, I should focus on other abilities? That's right. I'm going to work with you on resisting genjutsu. You actually have an advantage over Lee, since you have the chakra to break illusions on your own, but you're going to need to get better at recognizing them. Tenten paused. I've also asked my former sensei, Madogai, to meet with you next weekend and evaluate your suitability for learning one of his special abilities. Ken's eyes got big. I get to train with Guy Sensei, he asked eagerly. If he decides you're capable of learning what I've asked him to teach you, yes. Make sure you get some rest before you go to see him. Yash. Tenten turned to Keed. What about you? Keed didn't reply right away. I will seek advanced training for my Kekai bugs from my clan. I will tell them that I wish to improve myself so that my sensei cannot deny me a space in the exams next year. Tenten nodded. That's good. Spreading misinformation and training at the same time. The Kekai bugs are useful in a wide variety of situations. Shinos have saved my life more than once. What will you do against an opponent who neutralizes your bugs? Mist and Cloud Ninja can produce wide-ranging water or lightning attacks to damage large parts of your hive. There are Rock Ninja who exhale clouds of poison gas through earth element techniques, and of course you may encounter leaf genin like Amaya capable of using fire jutsus to simply burn your hive. The bugs also lose many of their advantages if an opponent gets close to you. You can't always rely on Amaya and Ken to keep opponents at a distance, and they won't be there for you in the final rounds. Keed considered that. I am not the first Aburain to be faced with these challenges, she reasoned. I will inquire as to how my elders have dealt with this situation. That's a good idea, Tenten told her. Ask your uncle Shino for a demonstration of the weapons he keeps up the sleeves of that coat of his. Once you've talked to them, come see me and we can plan out how to spend our time over the next few months. Keed nodded silently. Tenten's eyes turned to Amaya. You've had the most time to think about it, Amaya. How are you going to improve? I want to perfect my chakra control within a month, Amaya said confidently. I was hoping you could help me, Sensei. I'd be happy to assist you with that, but I'm curious as to what your end goal is. Chakra control by itself is useful in battle only as a means to an end, Amaya told her with an impish smile, and when Tenten was done laughing, she agreed without hesitation. That evening, Tenten sat on a stool at one of the bars frequented by Jounin, nursing a beer and trying to look worried. It seemed to be working. Ebisu and Ganma had already stopped by to let her know that they felt she had made the right decision in holding her team back from the exams. It was hard not to laugh in their faces, but if her students could keep up the act, so could she. The talk with Shikamaru had been far more nerve-wracking. He'd heard the rumors too, but was more curious about how she intended to handle the reactions of the Uchiha and Aburain. They'd played a game of shogi over bar peanuts, Tenten lost with good grace, and Shikamaru left without Tenten being any closer to figuring out if he had entered his team or not. When Tenten had ordered her genin to keep their entry secret even from their families, it hadn't been because she was worried about Ebisu or Ganma finding out. She wanted to keep Shikamaru in the dark, and even with all the precautions she gave herself no better than even odds of succeeding. The crowd was thinning out when a new arrival tapped Tenten on the shoulder. Looking up, she saw Anko leaning on the bar with a twisted grin on her face and a drink in hand. "Come sit with me," the purple-haired woman said, jerking her thumb to one of the private booths in the back. It wasn't a request. "Of course, Midarashi-sama," Tenten replied, picking up her drink and following the Hokage's wife. Sliding the curtain aside, Tenten slid into the private booth opposite Anko. They were alone. Anko winced at the formal mode of address. "Tenten, unless we're in the Hokage's office, it's just Anko." Tenten nodded in acceptance. "Now, I'm a little put out with you," Anko continued. "I had a pair of irate Uchiha clan elders in my office earlier this evening, demanding that their granddaughter's Genin team be placed with a different Jonin sensei, one who would enter her in the Chunin exams, since her current and obviously unfit sensei had not." Tenten held up one hand apologetically before Anko could continue, and made 3 quick hand signs, surrounding their booth with a privacy jutsu. Anko leaned across the table, eyes narrowed. 2 hours I had to listen to them bitch at me, Tenten. You're lucky I'm forbidden from talking about the nominations submitted by the Jonin sensei, or I would have told them the truth just to get rid of them. Tenten took a long drink to keep herself from laughing. Anko looked annoyed enough already, and Tenten reminded herself that the other woman had a short fuse and poisonous snakes up her sleeves. "I'm sorry that happened, Anko," Tenten said, trying to sound sincere and suppress the mirth in her voice. "They were supposed to come to me with their complaints." "Oh, they will," Anko said, sounding satisfied. "I informed them that the Hokage would not be reassigning any Genin teams to new instructors until after the exams, so if they wanted to change any mind, it would have to be yours." Tenten had a moment to be relieved that Anko wasn't mad anymore before she saw the malicious glint in the older Kunoichi's eyes. "What else did you do?" Tenten asked suspiciously. Instantly, Anko was a model of affronted innocence. "I would never stoop so low as to seek revenge on one of my cute subordinates for sicking her students' irate grandparents on me to conceal her team's entry into the Chunin exams," Anko proclaimed, before ruining it with a malevolent smile. "Just like I wouldn't mention in passing that I was meeting that cute subordinate for drinks after work and let said grandparents follow me." Blinking, Tenten was suddenly aware of a pair of substantial and angry chakra presences. They were nearby and coming closer. "You didn't," Tenten said, eyes widening. She was edging for the exit to the booth and mentally evaluating escape routes when she felt something cool and scaly wrap around her calf, binding it to the leg of the bench under the table. An alarmed glance revealed it to be a snake. Tenten checked the colors. "Yup, it's poisonous." "Ah. Anko?" Tenten asked, feeling the first beads of sweat on her forehead. "Oh, don't mind Kasumi, Tenten," Anko said with an evil smile. "She's just likes being affectionate sometimes. She'll be on her way in a few hours, and she probably won't bite you, as long as you don't move much." With that, Anko got up from her seat. "Have fun." With a cheery wave she was gone. Feeling a growing sense of desperation, Tenten glanced back under the table. "I don't suppose I could bribe you with some live mice or something if you let me go," she said to the snake. If it had a name, it was probably a summoned animal and intelligent enough to understand her. "Anything in the pet store, really. Just let me get out of here and it's yours." The snake looked amused as it shook its blunt head. "You're going to have to listen to them too," she warned the reptile. It let out a resigned hiss, but didn't loosen its grip. "Fuck," Tenten muttered. She'd known she would have to deal with Amaya's relatives, but she'd hoped to put it off and handle them in a more official setting. Preferably in public, with witnesses. She was pretty sure they wouldn't kill her with other people watching. The private booth's curtain moved aside, and a pair of dignified, gray-haired Uchiha slid into the opposite side of the booth where Anko had sat. Elder Taka. Elder Chihuya. What a pleasant surprise. A waitress came by, and the pair ordered some tea. When the curtain closed again, one set of Sharingan started spinning, then the other. "Why hello there dear," Elder Chihuya said in a matronly voice that was about as soft and cuddly as a katana blade. "I'm so glad we caught up with you. You see, we've heard the most disturbing rumors about the entries to the Chunin exams, and we wanted to make you aware of them. It wouldn't do for a simple mistake to cost our granddaughter and her sensei their chance at future advancement." The old harridan's tea arrived, and she sipped contentedly from the small cup. It is incorrect what we've heard about Amaya's team not being nominated for the Chunin exams, isn't it? No, you heard correctly. Ten winced at the wave of killing intent that crossed the table, and set out trying to get her favorite student to the Chunin exams unnoticed without being murdered by the girl's relatives. By the time she made it home, Ten was sufficiently exhausted that she was actually opening her front door before it registered that there was someone inside her apartment. The lanterns were lit, and there was noise coming from the kitchen. Drawing a kunai, Ten edged along the wall, peering around the corner. "Good evening, Ten," Niji said from his spot in front of the stove without turning around. He tossed the contents of the wok he was holding over the flames, making the contents sizzle. On her first mission in the field as part of Team Guy 6 years earlier, Ten had expected to end up doing all of the cooking as the only female in the squad. To her surprise, Niji had taken on half of the food preparation without complaint. Lee and Guy were both hopeless at cooking, but they were happy to fetch firewood and fresh water in the evening, so it worked out well. Niji had reacted to Tenten's shock that a Hyuga knew how to cook with a bitterly amused smile. Members of the main family like Hinata don't know how to cook, Ten. In the branch family, though, we don't have servants. We learn to cook, clean and do our own laundry. Niji! Ten exclaimed with surprise. You're back early. Making the kunai disappear back into her pouch, she strolled into the kitchen. That smells great, she commented. Thanks. Stirring the meat and vegetables in the wok, Niji shrugged. We caught a lucky break. The Nuknin they sent us to deal with were easier to find than we thought. They were pushovers, some degenerates wearing old Hashigakure headbands, but they didn't have any of the meteor power they were famed for. Ten leaned back on the counter. I see, she said. I'd be surprised if they did, since Kumogakure took their meteor almost 30 years ago, she thought, but kept that to herself. After all, Niji didn't know she'd seen the ruins of Hashigakure and knew exactly how brutally the Cloud Ninja had butchered their former neighbors down to the last woman and child they could find. You look exhausted, Niji commented as he took the food off of the stove and divided it onto 2 plates. Ten nodded glumly as they sat down at the table. I'm still alive, and I consider that a victory. Damn you, Enko. I spent the last few hours being alternatively lectured and threatened by Amaya's grandparents. Niji raised an eyebrow. You decided not to enter your genin in the Chunin exams, he asked neutrally. Their families and everyone else think so, and that's how it's going to stay, no matter how many creepy Sharingan they point at me. They'll get over it once they actually attend the exams, and maybe they'll stop thinking they're the only ones who know what's good for Amaya, Ten declared before digging into the food. Niji, this is delicious. Maybe it was a bit hypocritical to tell Niji after forbidding her students from telling anyone, but she knew Niji would keep the secret, and she couldn't say the same for every member of Keed and Amaya's clans. Ken was easy at least, he'd become a ninja to help provide for his civilian family, and they had no clue about or interest in the Chunin exams. Niji laughed and shook his head. So basically, you invited it on yourself? Ten growled at him, but it lacked feeling. Apparently, I invited it on Anko, who chose to retaliate by trapping me in the Jounin bar, out of uniform and beer in hand and alone with the pair of them. Not the setting I had wanted to have that conversation in. Niji winced. Nasty. Still, the worst is over, unless the Aburame decide to retaliate. You may want to check your bed for bugs tonight. Ten shook her head. I never had a chance of keeping it secret from the Aburame. I know how many of the insects flitting around the village report to that clan. Shino and Shibi, at least, already know, but they'll respect my intention to keep Keed's entry a secret. I just didn't want her spreading the news all over her clan compound. Stirring her food, Ten frowned. The only person I'm worried about is Shikamaru. I have no idea if he entered his genin, but if he did he'll be on the lookout for which other teams are entered. I don't think he can read me any better than I can read him, but no one's 100% certain what goes on in that man's head except Ino, and she has 2 advantages I don't. Niji looked at her curiously. 1, she's sleeping with him, and 2, she actually can read his mind. He snorted in amusement. When they were done with dinner, Ten cleaned the dishes, and the pair of them sat down on the couch. Niji picked up the book they had been reading together on the rare nights when they were both in the village and free from duty, a romance of star-crossed shinobi from enemy villages, and they read together by lantern light. After a while, Niji's arm slipped around her shoulder. A little while later, during a particularly touching passage in which the young man soliloquized his devotion to his beloved, Tenten was already starting to nod off when Niji's face grew closer to hers. She looked up, and before she fully realized it, their lips met. Tenten stiffened and pulled away. Niji, I can't. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He drew back, taking his arm from her shoulder, shaking his head. No, Tenten, I should be the one apologizing. That was thoughtless of me. He took a deep breath. I should go. I'll see you later? Tenten nodded wordlessly. Niji rose to his feet, headed out onto her balcony, then leapt onto the rooftops and was gone. Alone, Tenten let herself flop down onto the warm spot on the couch he had left, rubbing her face with her hands. I am the worst person ever, she whispered to herself. Niji had been her first, back when they had both been shunin, and they had been friends with benefits for years prior to her capture by the Akatsuki. Back then, it had been Tenten who wished the relationship could be more than it was, but the realities of clan politics interfered. Niji may have been a branch Hyuga, but he was also the strongest Hyuga in a generation, and as such his marriage would be decided by his uncle and the clan elders, and it would not be to a clanless kunoichi whose father was a blacksmith. She'd already figured out they would never be more than lovers when he'd apologetically explained it years ago, and she'd accepted that. Her time with the Akatsuki had changed everything. Tenten understood now that what she had felt for Niji was a combination of youthful infatuation and the allure of a safe harbor in a village where a young kunoichi couldn't trust most of the men around her. More importantly, her heart now belonged to another, a man who was undertaking dangerous work nations away, a man who wore a black cloak with red clouds. However, maintaining her cover meant that upon Tenten's return she had been forced to pretend that her feelings hadn't changed. She knew that even after being cleared by the Yamanaka that she was still on the ANBU's watch list and would be for years. As such, she had to be above suspicion. Unfortunately, during her absence Niji's feelings had only grown stronger, and he was more committed to her than ever. It was problematic, since Tenten was strictly a one-guy kind of girl, and Niji wasn't that guy anymore. Tenten had needed a reason to keep Niji at arm's length without arousing the suspicion that a breakup without an explanation would create. Any abrupt change in her life after returning to the village would be put under a microscope. At first, the cover story of imprisonment and torture Tenten had concocted to facilitate her reinsertion into Kanahagakure had seemed to provide a solution to the problem it created. The wounds she had been found with had all been real, of course, but suffering them had been her idea. Sasori, Deidara, Haiden and Konan had all tried to talk her out of it, accepting the plan reluctantly because they didn't have an idea with a better chance of success for how Tenten could return to Kanahagakure without being executed out of hand by the famously paranoid Hokage. Tenten hadn't actually been raped any more than she had been truly tortured. Kakuzu, the Akatsuki's expert on torture, had inflicted the wounds on her back and broken bones as professionally as he could, and Konan had reluctantly helped Tenten simulate the internal injuries with the aid of a blunted rod. But Niji and her other friends in Kanahagakure believed she had been violated by her captors, so when she shrank away from his slightest touch after returning home he accepted it, hiding the hurt she saw flash in his pale eyes. She'd expected, had hoped, that he would give up on her as damaged goods and move on, but she had badly underestimated his resolve. Half a year later he was still a perfect gentleman, almost moving into her apartment to look after her when she'd left the hospital, spending time with her, cooking meals for her, and rarely initiating any physical contact. That brief kiss was as bold as he'd been in the last 6 months. Tenten could see how much he cared, and how much her feigned fragility hurt him. She still cared about him as a friend, and her escape from intimacy with him had become torture for both of them. She was beginning to wonder what she could do if he didn't move on soon. She wanted to believe that enough time had passed that she was above suspicion, but she still saw Anbu out of the corner of her eye too often to believe that. With those cheerful thoughts in her head, Tenten tried to go to sleep. She had a lot to teach her students in the next 3 months, and she couldn't let her cover and her perfectly messed up relationship with Niji distract her from that, as much as she wanted to curl up into a ball of shame just thinking about it. Chapter 5, Cloud Watching. Tenten among the Akatsuki, Week 2. Wearing the chakra-absorbing chains and the simple white robe, Tenten sat behind a table in a small room in the Akatsuki base, lit by a single overhead light, while Sasori and Deidara loomed over her on the other side of the table. Slightly stunned, Tenten struggled to process what she had seen in the large cavern under the base that Sasori had shown her. Thinking about the massive statue she'd seen there, and the man cloaked in shadows who sat on its upraised hand, her mind reeled. She hadn't been able to see any features of the man the Akatsuki called leader save for the impossible eyes that bored into her soul, but that had been enough to terrify her even before they described the purpose of the statue. "Let's say I believe you," Tenten said quietly. She wasn't sure why she cared now. They would never let her leave this place alive after letting her see what they had shown her. "Let's say you do have a chance against the hidden villages. What do you want from me? What difference could I possibly make?" "Information," Sasori told her bluntly. "Getting intelligence out of Kanahagakure is like pulling teeth." Tenten looked at him with frank disbelief. "What possible reason would I have to tell you anything now?" Deidara frowned. "Because you want to help your village, and we can get rid of that snake Orochimaru?" Sasori shook his head at his younger partner. "That's not what she means, Deidara. Remember, she's grown up under Orochimaru's rule," he said, gazing calmly at Tenten. "She doesn't believe that we would let her live after showing her our secrets. Am I wrong?" Tenten asked with narrowed eyes. Sasori nodded. "You are. I would like your cooperation, and I have no reason to kill you. Here, I'll prove it to you." Stepping around the table, Sasori's hand came out of his sleeve holding a piece of paper with a seal she didn't recognize drawn on it. She drew back, but the chains limited her range of motion, and Sasori pressed the paper to her temple, and she felt his chakra surge through it. Tenten shuddered as a wintry chill passed through her skull, like her head had just been dunked in ice water. "What was that?" she demanded. "You'll see in a moment." "What's your favorite food?" Sasori asked suddenly. "What the hell kind of a question is my mother's rice balls?" Tenten said, blinking as the word came from her lips without her permission. "What was your standing on graduation from your ninja academy?" Sasori asked. "Fifth overall, first among kunoichi," she answered promptly, dismay and confusion plain on her face as her lips continued to move without her permission. "How many siblings do you have?" Tenten clenched her jaw, but it didn't help. "I'm the youngest of 5, 2 older brothers, 2 older sisters." When Sasori didn't ask another question, Tenten stared at him. "What did you do to me?" "Stand up," he said instead of answering, and Tenten's muscles acted without her input. Sasori did something to her chains that caused them to open and fall to the floor. He placed a kunai on the table in front of her. "Pick it up," he instructed. She did. "Cut your throat," Sasori commanded. Horrified, Tenten felt her arm rise to obey. Sasori's hand caught her wrist, stopping the blade inches from her skin, her arm's muscles straining against his grip to plunge the blade into her neck. "If I wished it, the seal I placed in your mind would compel you to tell me whatever I wish to know and perform whatever task I wish you to complete. I do this not to frighten or intimidate you, but to convince you that I have no need to kill you. If I wish to be rid of you, a different mental fuinjutsu would erase your memory of everything you have learned about us. I honestly would like you to help us and your village of your own free will, but if you truly cannot trust me and rise to this opportunity, I won't kill you." Seeing the understanding in her eyes, he said softly, "Drop the kunai." The weapon fell to the floor. Releasing her wrist, he tapped her temple with gentle fingers. "Release," he murmured. The piece of paper stuck to her skin dissolved and Tenten felt heat sink into her skin from his touch. Her muscles obeyed her once more. She staggered back a few steps, looking at Sasori with a mixture of awe and fear. She couldn't even begin to imagine the depth of fuinjutsu mastery required to do what he had just done to her. Even in the sections of the Kanahagakure library Jonins could access, none of the tomes had even hinted at the ability to apply fuinjutsu seals directly to a target's mind. "You really intend to defeat Orochimaru?" she asked after a long silence. "Not one of the kages of the 5 villages is fit to lead. We intend to remove all of them from power and break the tyrannical alliance they have formed," Sasori stated. "This is crazy. I shouldn't even be thinking about this. Yet, knowing there's a chance to fix Kanahagakure, how can I not?" Sasori looked in her eyes and saw her resistance waning. I understand you're worried about reprisals from the Hokage against those close to you, but I can ensure he never knows you have aided us, he reassured her. You wrote in your journals of nieces and nephews. Don't you want them to grow in a village more like the one Sarutobi Hiruzen ruled than the one Orochimaru had created? Tenten's shoulders slumped in resignation. All right, Tenten said, taking a deep breath. I'll help you take down the Hokage, but I won't participate in indiscriminate attacks on my village like the one you two pulled in Sunagakure. Lots of Konohagakure's ninja are good people who do their duty to protect the village. They deserve to be free of Orochimaru's reign. That's acceptable. We prefer to minimize bloodshed when possible. The diversionary attack on Sunagakure's gate was a regrettable necessity. So you're willing to fight with us, as well as provide information on Konohagakure? Sasori asked. Tenten shrugged. I'm a better fighter than spy, and if I'm not out there, how can I hold you guys to your word? Fair enough. You must understand, though, that Orochimaru doesn't rule alone, Sasori replied evenly. Many support his reign for their own gain. Tenten smiled thinly. You want lists of who falls into which category? Get me something to write with. Sasori thought about that before nodding. That would be useful information, but there's one small matter of procedure first, and I'm sure you'd like to get cleaned up first. Tenten nodded in agreement, eager for a shower after a week in that cell. Sasori motioned, and she followed him and Deidara down a few halls to a small apartment suite, where she had privacy enough to get cleaned up and put on fresh clothes that were actually hers. Her lips twisted in amusement as she realized that Sasori had gone through all of her storage scrolls, including the ones with changes of clothes in them. Clean, in her usual uniform and with her hair back in neat buns, Tenten felt a lot better. When she emerged, Sasori and Deidara were waiting. She followed them and realized with a start that they were headed back to the vast cavern with the statue. When they arrived, the leader was still there, but there were a number of other shinobi in Akatsuki robes as well standing or sitting on various parts of the statue, their features hidden in shadow. Several were only ethereal projections of some unknown jutsu. You wish to commit yourself to our cause, Tenten of Konohagakure? Just the sound of the Akatsuki leader's voice made Tenten shudder, or maybe it was the purple spiraled gaze that was locked on her. I do. Orochimaru and the other Kages are a blight on the elemental nations, she answered. Very well. Give her back her Hitayate, the leader said. Deidara handed Tenten's leaf forehead protector to her with one hand and a kunai with the other. She looked at it, then at the assembled Nukenin and their scored Hitayate, and understood. Tenten looked down at the forehead protector. It had been almost exactly 6 years since she had passed the graduation exam at the academy and worn it for the first time, and it had been one of the proudest days of her life. I'm sorry, Gai-sensei, she thought, knowing the teacher she loved and respected would be horrified by what she was about to do. When Orochimaru's dead and we're free, I hope you'll understand. Raising the kunai, she plunged it into the metal plate and dragged it horizontally across the leaf emblem. When she was done, a straight line bisected Konohagakure's logo. Taking a deep breath, she tied it around her forehead. Sasori stepped forward and settled a black cloak over her shoulders. She noted it lacked red clouds as she fastened it around her neck and let it close around her. The leader leaned back in his seat. Sasori's recommendation is enough to gain you invitation into our ranks, but it does not make you a true Akatsuki. Since Sasori recruited you, you answer to him for now, and you are his responsibility to monitor and train. 1 year from this day you will be evaluated by another of our members. If you survive, you will be one of us in truth and assigned a partner. Tenten understood the implications clearly. She had a year to learn enough from Sasori and on her own to survive a fight with one of the senior Akatsuki, or die. She bowed slightly. I will strive not to disappoint. Do that, the leader said with faint amusement. Then the projections of faraway Akatsuki faded and the ones physically present disappeared in blurs or puffs of smoke, leaving her alone with Sasori and Deidara. Sasori's hand fell on Tenten's shoulder. Come. We have much to do, both to help your village and to prepare you for your evaluation. Tenten nodded. And here I thought after the Jounin exam I was done with succeed or die tests. Sasori chuckled. For shinobi, those only end when you're dead. Let's get to work. 2 days before the Chunin exams. Tenten led Amaya, Keed, and Ken as they ran down a narrow, twisting valley surrounded by steep cliffs. They had left the forests of the Land of Fire behind almost a week ago, making their way carefully across a patchwork of small nations as they headed east and north, towards the Land of Lightning and Kumogakure. All three of her genin had improved noticeably in the time provided before the Chunin exam. The exam was only a few days away now, and they were set to arrive shortly before the opening ceremony. As the valley opened into a wider canyon with a river running through it at the bottom of a sloping incline, Ten came to a halt, and her genin paused behind her. "What are we stopping for, sensei?" "We can keep running," Ken said with a confident smile. It was afternoon and they'd been running since dawn. Amaya and Keed, silently catching their breath, glared at Ken. "We stop here until our escorts arrive," Ten told them. "This is the border of the Land of Lightning, so we'll wait for one of Kumogakure's patrols. It wouldn't be wise for us to travel further without identifying ourselves, it might be interpreted as hostile." They didn't have to wait for long. Less than 2 hours later, a trio of cloud ninja running along the top of the canyon rim to the north spotted them and darted straight down the cliff face to confront them. A woman with dusky skin and hair woven into a multitude of small braids lead the group, a younger man with blonde hair in a bowl cut and an older one with red hair going to gray following her. All three wore swords across their backs, a tanto for the woman and katanas for both men. They all came to a stop near where Ten and her students had settled in the shade of a rock overhang to wait. "You leaf ninja must be really lost," the kunoichi with braided hair declared. "Just taking the road less traveled," Ten answered respectfully. She rose to her feet, stepped forward, and extended a small scroll for them to see. It had the Reikage seal on it, and each sensei of a foreign team of genin arriving for the Chunin exams had one. The Cloud Kunoichi took it and examined the seal before handing it back without comment. "Any particular reason you didn't come in with your Hokage and the rest of your leaf friends?" she inquired. "Yes," Ten answered politely without elaborating. After a moment of silence, the Cloud Kunoichi's lips curved up into a faint smile. "Surudoi," she said without turning around. "Guide these four to the village and then return to the outpost. We'll continue our patrol." The kunoichi and the older shinobi with red hair darted back up the canyon wall and quickly disappeared. The young blonde shinobi named Surudoi bowed to Ten. "At your service, shall we depart?" It took another day and a half of travel with their cloud guide to reach Kumogakure, and a lot of the distance traveled was vertical, up into the mountains. Tenten's genin were all skilled enough wall walkers to keep up, which allowed their guide to take a more direct route. On the last half day of travel, once they'd reached Kumogakure's altitude, the journey became harder, and even Ten and Ken were a bit winded by the time the gates of the village hidden in the clouds came into sight. "I understand why you insisted we spend time on altitude training, sensei," Amaya gasped as they slowed to a walk, approaching the gates. Ten nodded. Each village was founded in terrain advantageous to its shinobi. Kanahagakure is surrounded by forest, Sunagakure by desert, Kirigakure by water, and Iwagakure is underground. Kumogakure's terrain advantage is its altitude. The air's thinner, so the shinobi born here have better lung capacity to compensate. Anyone from outside trying to attack this village would find themselves tiring out far more quickly than its defenders. Surudoi grinned and nodded wordlessly at the conversation. Ten and her team were allowed through the gates once the scroll was presented, and their guide departed to return to his border station. Ten got directions to the staging areas of the Chunin exams. When they made their way to the lodgings provided for Kanahagakure's ninja, Ten spotted a head with a distinctive pineapple-top hairstyle loitering outside the entrance. "Shikamaru," she said with a friendly wave. Ten. "Cutting it close, aren't you?" Shikamaru replied. Ten shrugged. "We made it with a day to spare, that's more than enough time." Glancing at her students, Ten gestured to the hotel. "Go find our rooms and get settled in." Amaya nodded, and headed inside followed by her teammates. "So, 4 teams from Kanahagakure. That should exceed what any of the villages other than our host are fielding," Ten commented to Shikamaru. 3, he corrected her. "My students are only here to observe and learn. I didn't enter them." Shikamaru's brow furrowed. "I'm surprised that you entered your genin, Ten. I thought you had the patience to wait. They're at a disadvantage here due to their age, and if they don't make it to the final round, they won't be able to compete on their home turf next year." They'll have to wait for the exams in Mist in 2 years. Tenten stilled, considering her response. More than most of her peers, she needed to avoid Shikamaru's suspicion. He knew her better and was smarter than any ANBU. Not everything is a calculation, Shikamaru. They're ready, Tenten answered firmly. They'll surprise you, and whoever else underestimates them. With that, Tenten slipped past him and went inside, hearing a muttered troublesome behind her. When she got inside, Amaya had already checked in and gotten their room keys. After dropping off their packs, showering and changing, Tenten and her genin left the lodgings to just walk around the public areas of Kumogakure. Tenten had only visited the mountain village a few times, and her genin had never seen it before. They found a nice local restaurant and had dinner, then headed back to the hotel. You three get some sleep and be ready to head out for the exam location on time. The exam starts at 8 sharp, and late contestants will be disqualified. Once her students were asleep and the night deepened until Kumogakure was quiet and dark, Tenten disregarded her own advice, stepping out onto her room's balcony and waiting for a gap in the Cloud ANBU patrols before dropping down into the alley below. It took her only seconds to shift a nearby manhole cover, climb down the ladder and replace the metal disc above her. Sighing and making a face at the smell, Tenten climbed down into the tunnel and set off with purpose. Kabuto had given her a map of the section of sewer under the hotel when he had passed on Sasori's orders that she enter her team and attend the exams, so she knew where the cloud patrols and traps were. Cautiously, Tenten wended her way deeper into Kumobakure's sewers. Less than half an hour later, she reached her destination, one of hundreds of seemingly featureless tunnels. Glancing around to ensure she was alone, Tenten rapped her knuckles on the brick wall in a specific pattern. A moment later, a section of wall quietly slid in and aside. Tenten slipped inside, and the hidden door grated shut behind her. Waiting in the hidden room at the end of a short tunnel were 2 men in black robes adorned with red clouds. Awfully big mice in these sewers, the larger of the pair rumbled in an amused tone when he saw the bun-headed Kunoichi rising from his seat to tower over Tenten. His strange eyes, green irises surrounded by a red scara, were his only visible feature. The rest of his face was covered by his hitayate, bandana and a mask over his nose and mouth. Bite me, Kakuzu, Tenten shot back. Is that an invitation? I know you like it rough, Kakuzu leered, long black tendrils extending from his arm for a moment. Tenten shuddered and glared at him, feeling the scars on her back itch at the memory. You enjoyed doing that way too much. Kakuzu shrugged. Not every day a pretty young thing like you asks me to torture her. Was I supposed to refuse? Come now, Kakuzu. There's no need to tease poor Tenten, the room's other occupant chided gently. Jashin's grace be upon you, my dear, the shorter, silver-haired man said as he rose to his feet, smile lines radiating from the corners of his dark eyes. The warrior priest was the age of Tenten's father, his face weathered but beaming as he regarded her. His head was uncovered, the hilt of his tri-bladed scythe protruded above his shoulder. Tenten skipped forward to offer a friendly hug to Haydn, and Jashin's light upon you, she murmured as she embraced the holy man. She was not an adherent of Jashin, Lord of Justice, but standing in the presence of his avatar in the mortal realm, it was impossible not to feel the soothing, otherworldly chakra that filled Haydn's body. The priest was an odd man out among the Akatsuki, the only full member not a shinobi by training. The temples of Jashin and their warrior priests and monks were known throughout the elemental nations as sanctuaries and places where the powerless could seek justice, be it from petty bandits or cheating landowners. Discovering during her time among the Akatsuki that Jashin's most holy adherent and wielder of his divine weapon supported their goals had done more than Sasori's cool logic to convince Tenten that she had made the right choice. It's good to see you, Haydn, but I'm sure I'm not here just because I've missed you since returning to Kanahagakure. What do you need me to do? Tenten asked. Kakuzu pulled a folder from inside his cloak and handed it to Tenten. Our mission from the leader begins when the Chunin exams end, Haydn explained, but yours begins now. Tenten opened the folder. It was a copy of one of Sasori's files on prominent shinobi. This file had a picture of a dusky-skinned cloud ninja with shaggy white hair long enough to cover his left eye. The man's visible eye held a calm, steely expression. He wore a katana across his back, and the uniform of a jounin along with a special insignia that Tenten didn't recognize. Darui, Tenten read the name, skimming over what Sasori knew of his abilities, habits, rank. Ten blinked at that. The Jonin commander of Kumogakure? Ten looked up at Haydn. He's your target? Haydn shook his head. No. He's your target. He smiled at Tenten's surprised expression. We need you to observe this man, get to know him if you can do so without arousing suspicion. Once the exams are over, you're going to need to put to use the skills you displayed against Sasori and Sunagakure and impersonate him well enough to briefly fool one of his subordinates. We need you to lure that person down here, into the sewers. Ten nodded in understanding. To fool someone who knew Darui, she'd have to get close enough to steal some of his chakra to make the henge perfect, as she had done with Gaara. Ten flipped a few pages deeper into the folder, and then almost dropped it when she reached the second shinobi profile. A Jinchuriki, she whispered. The Raikage own personal terror weapon, Kakuzu confirmed grimly. We're going to take it from them and put that power to a better use. Wordlessly, Ten memorized the information on Darui before returning the folder to Kakuzu. With the mission clear, Ten spent as much time as she could just sitting with the pair, catching up with Haydn on what had happened with the Akatsuki in her absence. All too soon though, Ten rose to her feet, knowing she'd have to return to her hotel before her absence was noticed. Bidding Haydn and Kakuzu goodbye, Ten retraced her steps and carefully emerged from the sewers, darting up the wall back onto the balcony outside her room. A quick glance around at the traps she had set on the door and windows assured her that no one had entered the room in her absence. Heading inside, she took another shower to wash off the stink of the sewers. Ten was just about to make an entry in her journal before going to bed when a whisper of sound presaged a pair of Cloud ANBU landing on her balcony. She'd left the door open to let in the cool mountain breeze, and when the pair advanced on the entryway, Ten palmed a kunai from her pouch. Did they see me entering or leaving the sewers? It's a bit late, she said calmly to the pair, one wearing a mask with an eagle's face, the other wearing a goat mask. Can I help you? Eagle spoke up. You're Ten of Kanahagakure? When she nodded tightly, he continued. Come with us, please. Not good. Ten thought grimly. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.